Chapter 50. Granduncle, is Zhang Yan crazy? He actually dares to capture more than 20 relatives of the true disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands. Isn't he afraid of offending these true disciples? Doesn't he care about the families behind these people? When he first heard Zhang Yan's actions, Feng Zhen almost suspected that he had heard wrongly. Although the 6 rivers and 4 islands were not a large family, they were still a force that could not be ignored when they joined forces. Moreover, one of the people captured was a direct descendant of the Feng family. Zhang Yan's actions were simply audacious and unscrupulous. Feng Shang, however, waved his large fan lightly and said with a calm expression, You still don't understand. This time, Zhang Yan has already used himself as a fulcrum to pry the master and disciple's bloodline into fighting with our families. Before the outcome is decided, the master and disciple's bloodline will definitely protect him. Who dares to stand up for him now? Thus, although his actions seem crazy, in fact, he is actually safe and sound. Feng Zhen, however, was puzzled. Then what? Does he not want to stay in the Yingsong sect anymore? Isn't he afraid that our Feng family or the 6 rivers and 4 islands will find trouble with him in the future? Feng Shang placed his hands behind his head and narrowed his eyes. That will also be a year and a half later. At that time, the situation? Who can say for sure? A year and a half? Feng Zhen was shocked. Why would it take so long? I heard that the family is working with several other families to pressure the master and disciple's bloodline, and the sect leader doesn't seem to be doing anything. Feng Shang sneered. Extremely stupid. Do you think that the master and disciple's bloodline is not acting because they care about the strength of our families? That's because they think that our families have too little meat and can't eat their fill. The sect leader wants you people who don't know what's good for you to jump out one by one so that they can catch all of you in one fell swoop. Feng Zhen was shocked. Don't our families share weal and woe and advance and retreat together? Isn't the sect leader afraid of causing public anger by doing this? Feng Shang shook his head repeatedly and said, This time, the master and disciple sect only targeted the 6 rivers, 4 islands, and our Feng family. They didn't invade the interests of our aristocratic families. People with discerning eyes will not die with us. Perhaps they have long been hoping that we will be weakened, so that they can follow behind and share a share of the profits. The aristocratic families were not united, and there were many contradictions between them. They would only fight against each other when the master and the disciple were harming their common interests. For example, Ning Chongxian watched the 5 inherited disciples being killed, which caused their common panic and dissatisfaction. But this time, it was different. The master and disciple lineage was clearly only targeting the Feng Corporation and the 6 rivers and 4 islands. If it had nothing to do with them, why did he have to wade into this muddy water? It was already good enough that he didn't take a bite. Besieging a true disciple is not a small crime. Not only do they not repent, they even want to suppress their master and disciple lineage. I think the Feng family will suffer a great loss this time. Feng Shang's eyes flashed and he said in a low voice, Zhang Yan's plan is vicious. With a flip of his hand, not only did he take advantage of the situation to wrap himself up, but he also took advantage of the situation to trick the Feng family. He is indeed a good opponent. Feng Zhen finally realized that the Feng family seemed to have a chance to fight back, but in fact, they were already in a deep crisis. He immediately broke out in a cold sweat and hurriedly walked down from his seat, bowed down, and said, Great-nephew asks granduncle, how should this matter be resolved? Feng Shang glanced at him and said indifferently, Of course there is a way. Let Feng Ji die obediently, kill him, and send him to the Zhengqing courtyard. Then, send someone to appease Zhang Yan. This way, we can cut off this matter in advance and not give the master and disciple a chance to attack us. Feng Zhen's eyes widened. In this way, won't we still lose the life of a Feng family member? That will greatly damage the reputation of the Feng family? Feng Shang snorted and said, When the nest is overturned, how can there be unharmed eggs? In my opinion, it's worth it to use Feng Ji's life to prevent the family from suffering a loss. You have to know that Zhang Yan's plan is vicious. No matter what the result is, it's a slap to the Feng family's face. We have to lose our face. Why do we have to hold on to it so tightly? Feng Zhen bowed on the ground and said, "Thank you for your advice, granduncle. When I return, I will report this matter to the elders in the family. I hope they will make a decision soon." Feng Shang slowly shook his head but did not say anything. Feng Zhen hesitated for a moment, then said hatefully, "But Zhang Yan is too hateful. I wonder if granduncle has a way to get rid of him?" The fan in Feng Shang's hand paused. His gaze was cold as he said, "When I lured Zhang Yan into the Danding courtyard, how could I not have a backup plan? It's just that now is not the time to act. We need to wait for the right time." Can granduncle reveal a thing or two? Feng Shang smiled and did not answer. Seeing that Feng Zhen was about to ask again, he simply lay down on the bed and covered his face with the fan. He said, "Time to sleep, time to sleep." Feng Zhen had no choice but to bow a few more times and leave. 5 months later. Dark clouds rolled on Spirit Page Island. Metal, wind, and fire chi roiled. It was several times more vigorous than usual. At this time, Zhang Yan had refined 80 breaths of dry spirit clear chi in his body. Now, he only needed one more breath before he could leap into the initial transformation of the Sea of Qi realm. Such rapid progress was all thanks to the elixirs sent by the Wang family and the method of refining the billowing cloud clear chi. However, this last breath of clear chi had been repeatedly condensed for 7 days and 7 nights, but there was still no success. In the end, he simply gave up the idea of refining it with the billowing cloud clear chi. Instead, he used the method of drawing chi and released the 80 breaths of dry spirit clear chi together in an attempt to extract this breath of clear chi from the Yuanjin. However, he did not expect that when the 80 breaths of clear chi were released, the last breath of clear chi somehow communicated with the heavy evil chi in the depths of the Earth's crust, causing the metal and fire chi to surge continuously. This heavy evil chi was far more ferocious than the usual evil chi. At this moment, as if knowing that he was about to succeed, the heavy evil chi surged towards his 5 apertures. It was as if it wanted to overwhelm him and destroy his Tao foundation. The 80 breaths of clear chi were also scattered by the heavy evil chi. If he was not careful, these refined clear chi could also be contaminated. At this critical juncture, Zhang Yan's original self was not disturbed. He guarded the Dan aperture and his spirit did not waver at all. In a flash, he fixed the 80 breaths of dry spirit clear chi. In his heart, he silently chanted the Tai gold calligraphy incantation. The Yuanjin slowly moved and very patiently grinded away the evil chi that seeped into his body from his pores. After another 3 days, the last breath of air was like a chicken that had just broken out of its shell. There was only a sliver left. At this moment, Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly opened. His body unconsciously shook, as if something had suddenly left his body. All the dry spirit clear chi outside suddenly surged and without being summoned, it all entered his eyes, ears, mouth and nose. His facial features immediately felt relaxed and light. Looking at his chest again, he saw the 81 breaths of clear chi were rippling like water waves. At this moment, he had officially stepped into the first level of clear chi, the state of initial formation of Sea of Qi. But the clear chi floated up and down in the Dan aperture, like the rolling of the rivers and seas. This power did not seem to want him to stop and continued to urge him to circulate his technique. Zhang Yan understood something. He opened his mouth and inhaled. He swallowed a mouthful of the heavy evil chi in front of him and wrapped it with the clear chi. He placed it into the Yuanjin and continued to grind it. After a day and night, he just now grinded away the heavy evil chi. At this moment, greenish-black sweat continuously seeped out from the pores of his body. Phew! He let out a long breath. A blackish-gray breath, like smoke, was spat out from his mouth and nose. Looking at his inner body, he realized that other than the 81 breaths of dry spirit clear chi, there was actually another breath of black chi. Zhang Yan could not help but be overjoyed. He actually managed to gather the first breath of Kunling evil chi? Didn't that save him a few months of effort? Wonderful, wonderful. This second step is even more difficult than the first. Who knew that the Tai Golden Scripture would be so marvelous? Extreme Yang as Yin, extreme yin as yang. I actually broke through 2 stages in one breath. Fortune and misfortune indeed go hand in hand. It all depends on whether I can keep my heart and follow the Tao. He had great luck on him. The heavenly Tao lifted the whip high and kept striking down, not allowing him to slack off. But wasn't this exactly what he wanted? The cultivation of Shen techniques was naturally like rowing a boat against the current. There was no retreat. Only by taking a step forward would one be in line with the heavenly heart. Hence, it was unstoppable. If one's will was not strong enough, even if it was just a step back, one would be abandoned by the heavenly Tao. At this time, Zhang Yan saw 81 breaths of dry spirit clear qi gathering and dispersing in his body, moving around unpredictably, but a breath of turbid qi was stagnant and heavy, like a deep well. His heart moved, he opened his mouth and spat out the turbid qi from his chest, only to hear a qi sound. The stone wall was actually pierced by a hole of unknown depth, 2 fingers wide. He took another deep breath and recalled the turbid qi back into his chest. He realized that the turbid qi was not damaged at all. It was obvious that this wasn't the limit of the turbid qi. He could not help but nod his head. No wonder the Tai Golden Scripture said that when one cultivated to the mystic light realm, one ray of mystic light would be able to melt metal. Just the turbid qi alone has such power. It seems like it wasn't an exaggeration. Zhang Yan knew that he had used up all his momentum this time. His cultivation probably wouldn't be able to take another step forward in the next few days. He still had to slowly train himself in the future. He calculated that he would need at most half a year. In another half a year, he would be able to enter the 2nd level of bright qi, summon clouds and summon clouds. At that time, the turbid qi and clear qi would merge together and he would be able to condense the qi of clouds and rain. He would be able to use this qi to travel through the clouds without the help of a flying boat. For flying techniques, only when one reached the 3rd level of bright qi would there be a seed of mystic light in their body. Only then would they be able to use this seed of mystic light to merge with their flying sword. If they reached the 1st level of mystic light realm, spirit light initial illumination, they would be able to use mystic light to cover their body and travel through the void. Shoo! Zhang Yan suddenly heard a sharp sound from outside the cave and he immediately recognized that it was the sound of the Howling Lake Golden Sword. Who sent him a letter? He immediately took out the talisman and released the restriction. He opened the door of the cave and allowed the golden sword to fly in. After catching the sword, he opened the letter and saw that it was informing him that the direct disciples would gather together to admire the moon and view the scenery 10 days later. It was an invitation to attend the meeting. Chapter 51. When he saw that the location of the moon appreciation party was on Jade Ear Island, Zhang Yan's expression changed subtly. This Jade Ear Island was one of the 6 rivers and 4 islands. He had just tricked them, and now they invited him to the island. There must be a deeper meaning behind this. As far as he knew, the 6 rivers and 4 islands had already expelled their offending clansmen from the Black Tsong sect a month ago. He just didn't know how much they had paid to save their lives. As for the Feng clan, although they were still stubbornly refusing to give in, their attitude had already softened. Bowing their heads was only a matter of time. He flipped through it again and found that there were many strange things about this letter. The handwriting was graceful, and it was obvious that it was written by a female cultivator. Moreover, there was no invitation card for him to attend the party. Did they want him to go or not? Shaking his head, he tossed the letter aside. In his opinion, it didn't matter whether he went or not. Instead of wasting his time on this, it was better to seize the time to improve his cultivation. But before that, he had to first solve a problem that was neither too big nor too small. To practice the 2nd step of the Tai Golden Scripture, he had to release all of the pure spirit qi every time to draw out the heavy baleful aura from the depths of the earth aperture. This was actually extremely troublesome and inefficient. He pondered, could he think of a way to preserve the baleful aura? After thinking for a long time, a ray of light suddenly flashed before Zhang Yan's eyes. In the alchemy technique that Zhou Changju had taught him, wasn't the internal orifice technique to open another qi aperture in the body to store different kinds of qi? Wasn't this a natural place to store qi? One had to know that this aperture was isolated from the inside and could store all kinds of vicious poisons with visible medicinal power, not to mention the invisible heavy baleful aura. Moreover, what could be more convenient than storing it in one's own body? Thinking of this, he hurriedly took out the alchemy manual and flipped through it again. According to what was written, the chi apertures corresponded to the 5 elements and 5 senses. A person could at most open up 5 chi apertures. The key to the internal orifice technique was completely in the later stages of alchemy. The spell itself was extremely easy and posed no difficulty to him. He sat down on the jade platform and began to circulate according to the spell in the manual. In less than half a day, he had opened up 3 chi apertures in a row. However, he couldn't continue if he wanted to. He knew that with his current cultivation, he had probably reached the limit. The heavy baleful aura was turbid. After losing the guidance of the clear chi, the metal wind and fire slowed and sank back into the ground. At this moment, Zhang Yan once again exhaled a breath of clear air, and with a turn of the fire mouth, he instantly sucked in the half-sinking and half-sinking heavy fiendish chi again. His nostrils lightly puffed up, and he breathed in this flow of chi, carefully guiding it towards the chi aperture in his chest. Once it entered the aperture, the heavy fiendish chi steadily sank down and remained motionless. Seeing that this method was effective, Lu Ming calmed down. He didn't impatiently swallow the entire heavy baleful aura. Instead, he slowly guided it in. 4 hours later, 1 chi aperture was filled with heavy baleful aura. Zhang Yan inspected himself. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with his body, he relaxed and decided to fill up another chi aperture. If there was still no problem, then he might as well fill up the 3rd chi aperture. This time, he took about a night to absorb the heavy baleful aura. By the time the sky brightened, he had finally filled up all 3 chi apertures. Actually, according to the amount of heavy baleful aura he had refined before, the amount of heavy baleful aura in 1 chi aperture was enough to train to the 2nd realm. However, he felt that the heavy baleful aura seemed to have another use. To be safe, he would rather have more. It was better to be prepared. After a hard night, his face was still full of energy. Clear chi surrounded his face and he didn't look tired at all. At this time, he suddenly heard a shout from outside, "Is Zhang Shishu here? Is Zhang Shishu here?" Zhang Yan thought the voice was familiar. He stood up and went out to take a look. He discovered that the person calling him was the Taoist child in front of Dan Ding courtyard. He couldn't help but frown. Seeing Zhang Yan come out, the Taoist child didn't even care about etiquette. He went up and pulled on his sleeve, saying, "Shishu, the patriarch has summoned you. Did something happen?" Zhang Yan's face froze. He nodded and tidied up a little. He followed the Taoist child onto the flying boat and went to Dan Ding courtyard. The journey was as fast as lightning. In less than 2 hours, they arrived in the sky above Luzhou. The Taoist child didn't stop. He hurriedly drove the flying boat to the mountain gate. After circling around the mountain, he could see the fish boat anchored in the middle of the river. When the flying boat landed, Zhang Yan walked into the fish boat. He saw Zhou Changju sitting in the hall. Zhou Changju's face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. Zhang Yan's heart couldn't help but sink. He asked, "Shixiang, what happened?" "You're here." Zhou Changju pointed at a chair to the side, indicating for him to sit down. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "A few days ago, an envoy from the water nation of Dang region came. They wanted to hold an elixir gathering for their king, Ji Jiushang's birthday in half a year. Thus, they specially came to ask for several alchemists from our sect. They were also willing to give up a shell yard to show their sincerity. If we could resolve this matter without fighting, the sect master naturally agreed. The water nation of Dang region was actually a demonic cultivator tribe. However, they were extremely powerful. Even the demonic beasts of the 3 lakes, who had fought against the Dark Azure sect for more than 10 years, were only nominally their vassal." Zhang Yan listened quietly. He knew that there was more to this matter. Zhou Changju slammed his fist on the table and said, "A month ago, I was invited by Elder Jiang to refine pills. Assistant monastery head Do temporarily took over the matters of the pavilion. Who knew that when I wasn't around, He would actually put your name in the list of envoys. Now that the envoy from the Water Nation has returned, it was already too late when I returned today. Zhang Yan's expression was calm, as if this matter had nothing to do with him. He asked, "How did Assistant Monastery Head Do explain this?" Zhou Chongju's eyes were filled with anger. He snorted and said, "Do Ming said that it was due to the negligence of his subordinates. He had already killed that person and was willing to resign from his position to retire at home. He would no longer hold the position of Assistant Monastery Head." Zhang Yan said mockingly, "He must have already made arrangements for his escape. Moreover, senior brother can't do anything to him." It was extremely easy for Do Ming to evade this matter. Moreover, Zhang Yan was indeed a member of the Pill Cauldron sect and a disciple of Zhou Chongju. Since there was someone taking the blame, there was probably not enough reason to punish him. At most, he would reprimand him, but it would be impossible to hurt him. As for the future, whether or not they could find him was still a problem. Someone must be playing tricks behind the scenes. Zhou Chongju said angrily. "I suspect it's Feng Shang. This is very much like his style." What he was afraid of was that if it really was Feng Shang's style, then all the loopholes were actually traps. If that was the case, replacing Zhang Yan or simply not going would not work. Perhaps he was waiting for them to do so. When Zhang Yan was in the Yingtsang sect, because of his identity as a true disciple, these people could temporarily do nothing to him. However, what Zhou Chongju was worried about was that once he left, things would be completely different. There would be plenty of opportunities to make a move. Zhou Chongju turned his head and looked at Zhang Yan. He said in a low voice, "Junior brother, this matter has already been decided. If you don't go, what will you do? If you don't want to go, I will sacrifice my old face to beg someone. He will definitely guarantee your safety." The muscles on his cheeks twitched faintly, as if he had thought of something extremely embarrassing. Zhang Yan lowered his head and pondered for a moment. When he raised his head again, a smile gradually appeared on his lips. "Senior brother, I'm willing to go." Zhou Chongju looked at him in surprise. "Have you thought it through?" Zhang Yan said, "I might not be safe in the sect. There will be more and more tricks like this. It's impossible to guard against them. Although I'm not afraid, it will affect my cultivation. This trip to the Shui Kingdom will not be in the sights of the aristocratic families. It's a place where fish can leap freely in the vast sea and birds can fly freely in the vast sky. Perhaps this is my chance." Zhou Chongju pondered for a moment and slowly nodded. "What you said is somewhat reasonable." He paused for a moment before continuing, "But you still need to be careful. According to my deduction, if they want to attack you, there are only two possibilities. One is to attack you on the way, and the other is to cause trouble in the Shui Kingdom. I think the latter is more likely. If you die there, not only will the sect master not pursue the matter, he will only say that other sects are deliberately stirring up discord between the two sections." Zhang Yan nodded to show that he understood. Although he was a true disciple, if something really happened to him in the Shui Kingdom, the Yutsong sect would not easily go to war with the Shui Kingdom for him. They would only try their best to calm the matter. Perhaps in the future, when they shed all pretense of cordiality with the Shui Kingdom of the Dang region, they would use his death as an excuse, but their goal would not be to avenge him. Zhou Chongju sneered. "I've checked the roster. On this trip to the Shui Kingdom of the Dang region, besides you, there are a few people who were once Do Ming's trusted followers. There must be a reason for this. You don't know alchemy, and this matter is not a big deal. It's fine if you make things clear, but you are my disciple. If someone adds fuel to the fire in the Shui Kingdom of the Dang region, spreading rumors and secretly slandering you, it is very likely that our sect will become enemies with the Shui Kingdom of the Dang region. When that happens, you will bear the brunt of it." At this point, he glanced at Zhang Yan and sighed. "There are still 10 days before we set off. In these 10 days, I will teach you as much as I can. We can only make every possible effort." 10 days? Zhang Yan thought of the true disciple's moonlight appreciation incident. Could there be a connection between the two? Then he remembered another matter. Luo Xiao also knew a little alchemy, so it was obvious that the Yao cultivators did not lack alchemists. Why did they come to the Yingtsang sect to borrow alchemists? When he asked Zhou Changju about this, he replied, "You may not know, but although the Yao cultivators know alchemy, they only know some superficial techniques. They can refine some ordinary pills, but only we human cultivators can refine high-quality pills. The reason is that only human cultivators can cultivate the three orifices technique. Even if the Yao cultivators can transform, they can't practice it. Therefore, they can only rely on human cultivators to refine high-quality pills." Ji Zhushang, the ruler of the Shui kingdom of the Dang region, has always been fond of grandiose achievements, so this is not surprising. At this point, Zhou Changju seemed to think of something and said, "The internal orifices technique I passed on to you must not be leaked. If the Yao cultivators find out, the world will be turned upside down. Senior brother, don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. "But I don't think we can let Deputy Chancellor Dou get away so easily." Zhou Changju nodded and looked at Zhang Yan. "Junior brother, what do you plan to do?" Zhang Yan smiled. "Since he is gone, it would be a pity for Deputy Chancellor Dou's alchemy skills to go to waste. Why don't we report this to the sect master and let him be my assistant? He can come with me. P.S. All kinds of crashes, all kinds of disconnections, extremely depressing." Chapter 52. 10 days later, the delegation to the water country of the Dang domain was ready to set off. Including Zhang Yan, there were more than 60 people on this journey. They were led by a cultivator at the third tier of the clear qi stage called Wuzhen. Everyone would ride a Feiyao pagoda towards the water nation. This pagoda was much faster than ordinary flying boats. It would only take them less than a month to reach their destination. Among the 12 alchemists sent by the Danding courtyard, Dou Ming was one of them. Originally, he had already extricated himself from this matter, but he didn't expect that Zhang Yan would drag him back. Moreover, he didn't even have a position now, so he had to act according to Zhang Yan's will. Thus, he kept his head down and didn't say a word along the way, afraid that he would lose face in front of everyone. Zhang Yan didn't pay attention to him, but before he left, he received a beautifully written letter with a jade pendant attached. Judging from the handwriting, this letter was from the same person who had invited him to admire the moon. The letter said, "Because of your servant's willfulness, your servant feels very uneasy and can only offer this as a token of apology. The road ahead will be bumpy, please take care." There was no signature at the bottom. Zhang Yan looked at the jade pendant, and with his extensive knowledge of Taoist books, he recognized the origin of this jade at a glance. This jade was called the moon-seizing heart jade, and it was used to assist in cultivation. It was said that under the bright moon, the person who wore it would be able to make the speed of the circulation of qi several times faster than usual, and it could be considered to be a treasure. Zhang Yan wanted to ask who the woman who sent the letter was, and who wrote the letter and gave the jade pendant, and where did the word implicate come from. However, the woman seemed to have already given him instructions and didn't answer. Instead, she curtsied, turned around, and hurried away. Zhang Yan looked at her back and smiled. Since he couldn't guess the origin of this person, he didn't want to waste time thinking about it. Immortal cultivators did what they wanted, so why worry about such trivial things? When the time came, everything would naturally become clear. He turned around, lifted the hem of his robe, and slowly stepped into the tower. Once he arrived at the building, a strong man led him to a prearranged residence. After he went upstairs, he glanced around and saw a familiar figure flashing past the corner. He couldn't help but frown. That person was undoubtedly Feng Ji. Why was this person here? Zhang Yan immediately felt that this matter was a little unusual. He looked at the layout of his surroundings and found that his residence was arranged on the 4th floor. This arrangement was very subtle. He glanced around and saw that the entrances and exits to the upper and lower floors were both guarded by strong men. Moreover, their gazes would sweep over him from time to time. When everyone went up to the tower, Wu Zhen, who was standing on the highest floor, waved the talisman in his hand. The tower shook slightly, and then flew up, steadily making its way to the water kingdom of the east. Zhang Yan casually walked around and discovered that this pagoda was divided into 7 floors, which could accommodate 100 people. It was hexagonal, with vermilion pillars, round windows, golden bells hanging from the eaves, and mythological beasts sitting on them. At the top of the pagoda, there was a chi-gathering copper gourd. When it flew up, the clouds at the bottom of the pagoda would follow it, and the auspicious mist would dazzle anyone who looked at it. But after walking around, he felt that something was not quite right. After thinking about it carefully, he finally found out what the problem was. During this trip, he also saw many disciples of aristocratic families, but these disciples were usually accompanied by strong men and women wherever they went. This trip to the water kingdom of the Dang domain would take more than a year, so it was reasonable for them to have a few strong men with them. But they didn't even bring a single woman with them. This didn't make sense. Unless they didn't want to go very far. Thinking about Feng Ji's appearance here, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Before he set off, he knew that someone would attack him. He thought that they would at least wait until they reached the boundary of the water kingdom of the Dang domain, but now it seemed that some people didn't want him to reach there alive. Carefully thinking about those who had entered the tower, Wu Zhen's cultivation was undoubtedly the highest, and he was the most difficult to deal with. But that didn't mean that there were other cultivators with similar cultivation, so he had to be on guard. If they were in the sect, everyone would be restrained by the rules of the sect and various factions, so they could come up with their own schemes. But now that they were in the outside world, everything depended on strength. The strong were strong, the weak were weak. No schemes or plots were applicable here. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He returned to his room in the tower and began to call for Luo Xiao in his mind. With the essence blood oath, even if the two were separated by thousands of miles, they could still sense each other's location. They could also sense whether the other was in danger or not. As early as 10 days ago, he had already done this, but he hadn't received a response. This time, he felt his heart skip a beat, and he couldn't help but rejoice, knowing that Luo Xiao was rushing over. He put down his thoughts and decided to seize the time to meditate and cultivate. He wanted to use this time to refine a few more mouthfuls of Kuan spirit turbid energy so that he could protect himself. After more than 10 days, he successfully refined another mouthful of Kuan spirit turbid energy. At the same time, he felt that Luo Xiao was getting closer and closer. These days, there was no movement in the tower, but he didn't let his guard down. The 3 magic treasures were always by his side, ready to deal with any changes that might occur at any time. But where was he now? He pushed open the door and walked out to take a look. However, he frowned and thought to himself, why does this direction look like it's heading towards the Surging Waves Lake? The Surging Waves Lake was one of the 3 lakes. The lake master, Chu Yu, was a carp spirit that had cultivated for more than 1,000 years. It was said that after the 3 lake demons and the Dark Azure sect had decided to stop fighting, he was the first to stop. Although he could also reach the water country from the demons' territory, the distance was actually not shortened. Moreover, this was a provocation. Looking at the sudden appearance of a few more strong men today, their expressions were faintly unfriendly. Zhang Yan's gaze sharpened. He instinctively felt a deep sense of danger coming towards him. Most likely, the moment before he reached the Surging Waves Lake would be the time for the other party to choose to make a move. He sneered, his eyes overflowing with killing intent. He gripped the Rui Divine Shuttle in his sleeve. Although Luo Xiao hadn't arrived yet, instead of waiting, he might as well take the initiative to attack and catch the other party off guard. At this moment, 1,000 miles away from the Surging Waves Lake, there was a flying palace that was a few miles wide on top of the clouds. A person sat on a high platform in the middle of the palace. He had a large nose and a wide forehead. His eyes were like an eagle's, and his chin was as wide as a pillar. He wore a purple gold crown with long tassels hanging down from his shoulders. He wore the mystic dragon golden armor, a rock feather cloak, and a pair of black cloud boots with the head of a beast. His body was muscular, twice the size of a normal person. This person was the eldest direct descendant of the Qinyang Su family, Su Yihong. At this moment, his bright eyes looked towards the north. He saw dozens of lights flying towards him and landing on the floating stairs in front of the flying palace. These dozens of people were all at the Mystic Light Realm, and the person at the front was even at the 3rd level of the Mystic Light Realm. This person walked out of the crowd and cupped his hands. Higwa greets Senior Marshal Brother Su. Su Yihong said in a deep voice, "How is the situation?" Higua laughed loudly and said, "Uncle Chu, that old carp, is still in the dark and doesn't know anything. This is perfect for us to make a move." Good. Su Yihong slammed the table and stood up. His eyes turned and swept across the crowd. He said, "Today's matter concerns our plan for the next 100 years. Is there anyone among you who wants to back out?" His eyes were filled with power, and the expressions of these dozens of cultivators became cold. Higua took the lead, and everyone bowed and said, "We will follow Senior Marshal Brothers' orders." Su Yihong nodded in satisfaction. He slowly sat down and gripped the roaring lion head on the armrest. He said, "Back then, a few elders of the sect promised me that as long as I conquered the Shenzi stream, they would give this place to me and allow me to set up a faction outside of the sect. I have been fighting outside for many years, and I have already reached the gates of Old Carp's 9-tune stream palace. I am only one step away from fulfilling my wish, but someone just had to want to make peace with the Water Nation at this time. This time, I will not let them get what they want." Higua said loudly, "Senior Marshal Brother, you only need to tell us what to do. We are all of one mind." Su Yihong said, "It has been 12 days since Erlang left on the Feiyao Pagoda. Calculating the time, there is at most a day's journey from here. Once Erlang takes down that direct disciple called Zhang Yan and takes his head, we can use the death of the direct disciple as an excuse to attack 9-tune stream palace, flatten the Shenzi stream palace in one fell swoop, and kill Old Carp. After we occupy this underwater residence, let's see if the demonic fish Chu you can still endure it." Someone said, "I have heard of this Zhang Yan before. Last time, he was the one who accidentally killed Erlang's spirit pet and captured quite a number of his martial brothers. He made Erlang lose a lot of face. This time, we can take revenge on him." Su Yihong nodded and turned to look at a young cultivator behind Higua. He said, "He Fong, personally go and receive Erlang. For the sake of safety, after taking down Zhang Yan, kill all the people accompanying him. If Erlang tries to stop you, just say that it is my order." He threw down another item and said, "I will give you another token talisman. It can capture this person's primordial spirit. When the time comes, find a spirit beast and erase its primordial spirit to exchange for his. Then give it to Erlang and let him be an animal forever." When he said that, everyone in the surroundings broke out in a cold sweat and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Yifang, however, was very excited. He went forward to take the token talisman and patted his chest, saying, "Senior Marshal Brother, don't worry. Wait for a moment, I will return with Erlang and Zhang Yan's heads." He turned around and walked down the hall. Just as he was about to fly out, he felt his arm being pulled by someone. He turned around and saw that it was his brother, Higua, who had chased after him. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Big brother, what's the matter?" Higua said with concern, "I heard that Zhang Yan is very cunning and good at using schemes. Second brother, you have to be careful when you go. You can't be careless. You have to know that it is a small matter if you make a mistake, but you can't ruin Senior Marshal Brother Su's big plan." He Fong was instantly dissatisfied and said, "Big brother, don't underestimate me. That Zhang Yan doesn't even have the cultivation of the clear Qi realm. I am a cultivator of the second level of the mystic light realm. Why should I be afraid of him?" After he finished speaking, he swung his arm away and was about to turn around to leave. However, Higua grabbed him tightly and shoved something into his hand. "Take this. This is the purple heart-stopping hammer that Senior Marshal Brother Su gave me last time. Take it and use it." Yifang rejected it and thought, "Big brother is looking down on me too much." However, Higua insisted, so he had no choice but to accept it. He muttered a few words and walked to the top of the stairs. A profound light appeared under his feet, and in the blink of an eye, a scarlet light flew into the sky. Chapter 53. The moon in the sky was bright and clear, shining down like water splashing down. The moon heart jade in Zhang Yan's chest trembled slightly, and he felt that the circulation of his qi was almost twice as fast as usual. He couldn't help but think to himself, "Heaven is helping me." When the sky emits murderous intent, the stars change their positions. When the earth emits murderous intent, the dragons and snakes rise from the land. When a man emits murderous intent, the heavens and earth change. He stood by the railing and caressed the Rui divine shuttle in his hand. With a flick of his finger, a dang sound rang out. His eyes shot out a cold light and he said, "Today, you shall drink blood to your heart's content." The 3 seawalkers who were guarding the staircase stared at him intently, but they didn't hear what he said. At that moment, Zhang Yan waved his sleeve toward them, and a beam of green light shot toward them. It circled in the air, and before the 3 of them could react, their heads fell to the ground. The green light circled in the air again, and shattered the 3's origin spirits before flying toward another staircase. When it returned to Zhang Yan's hand, there was no sound of breathing on the other side. Zhang Yan shook the hem of his robe sleeves and leisurely walked towards the room on the side. These were the residences of the alchemists, but these 11 people were originally Dou Ming's trusted aides. After opening their meridians, the alchemists needed to practice the 3 orifices technique for decades, so they didn't have any qi of heaven and earth. At this moment, they were all asleep, so it was best to deal with them. Zhang Yan broke the door, killed one with a finger, and scattered their origin spirits. When he came to the last room, just as he opened the door, he saw a person suddenly jump up from the bed, and the long sword in his hand stabbed towards him without a sound. Zhang Yan snorted coldly, and a white breath came out from his nose, hitting the person's cheek. The person screamed as if he was hit by a hammer, and flew out, falling on the bed behind him with a bang. Zhang Yan took 2 steps forward and looked down at Dou Ming. Even without the aid of a candle, he could tell that this person was Dou Ming. At this moment, Dou Ming was covering his bleeding eyes, shrinking back as he shouted, "Zhang Yan, on this trip to the Water Nation, you still need us to concoct pills for you." I'm still useful to you," Zhang Yan sighed and said, "the harm is greater than the benefit." He stepped forward and struck Dou Ming dead with his palm. Then he opened his mouth and blew, scattering Dou Ming's spirit. Walking out of the room, he slowly walked towards the 5th floor. There seemed to be more than 20 people, and it seemed that someone had already noticed the commotion upstairs. A group of Heineck soldiers hurried up the stairs, but they felt that the road ahead was blocked. They raised their heads abruptly and saw a figure standing right in front of them. They exclaimed, "Ha!" Zhang Yan exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. With a poochie sound, he opened a round hole in the man's forehead. Then, he kicked him in the chest and his corpse rolled down the floor. There was a commotion below. "Who is it? Boss Ding has been killed." "Zhao Air, quick, pull the alarm bell." "What's that?" "Oh no." There were a total of 23 river-flipping warriors on the 5th floor. Their strength was a notch lower than the Heineck soldiers. They didn't know about the plan to get rid of Zhang Yan beforehand. At this moment, they saw a green light streak past, and a few of the alarm ropes were all cut. Since the leader had already been killed by Zhang Yan, they instantly fell into chaos. Seeing Zhang Yan slowly walk down, they were all stunned. Blank expressions appeared on their faces, and they didn't understand what had happened. They thought that this cultivator was dissatisfied with Ding Wu, so he killed him casually. Zhang Yan ignored them. With a wave of his hand, the Rui divine shuttle circled around the area. By the time he reached the 6th floor, the 5th floor was littered with heads rolling down. Even their spirit had been wiped out. On the 6th floor, a cultivator who was originally sitting upright on a praying mat suddenly opened his eyes. His body swayed, and he appeared in front of Zhang Yan, blocking his way. This cultivator was a level 2 clear chi cultivator, but he wasn't in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he said, "Zhang Yan? I've heard Feng Langjun mention you repeatedly. Today, I'd like to see how capable you are." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "Feng Ji? Where is he?" "Junior apprentice brother Feng is downstairs, but do you think you can make it down alive?" The cultivator sneered, "I've been cultivating for 23 years, and I've practiced the water-wood mysterious art. I have a total of 24 mouthfuls of pure qi in my chest, far more than a normal person's 16. You're definitely not my match, so I advise you to surrender." With 2 swishing sounds, 2 figures flashed, and 2 level 1 clear chi cultivators appeared behind him, one on the left and one on the right. The cultivator couldn't help but calm down. In fact, he was also nervous just now. Zhang Yan had killed so many Hynix soldiers on the 5th floor in such a short period of time. How could his strength be ordinary? Therefore, he first used words to intimidate his opponent so that his companions would be prepared. He didn't think that his opponent would really fall for it. It should be known that the more chi activity one had, the more techniques one could use. On paper, a cultivator's strength was also stronger. In reality, how could he have 24 mouthfuls of pure chi in his chest? It was only 16 mouthfuls. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "It's good that everyone is here. Kill." The 2 level 1 clear chi cultivators didn't have the qualifications to learn techniques, so they only relied on the flying swords in their hands. At this moment, they shouted together, and the flying swords in their hands slashed towards Zhang Yan. The level 2 clear chi cultivator took a step back, and 16 mouthfuls of pure chi sprayed out from his mouth and nose. They circled in the air, flashing with yellow light. Unexpectedly, they were about to form a technique. But suddenly, a green light flashed in front of them, and with 2 cha-cha sounds, 2 heads fell to the ground. The 2 flying swords that flew in front of Zhang Yan suddenly lost their spiritual vigor, and he raised his hand to pull them out. Seeing that the 16 mouthfuls of pure chi were about to form a technique, Zhang Yan's mouth curved into a sneer. He threw out the announcing fate brush in his hand. The brush turned in the air, and suddenly, all the spiritual chi was swept away. The cultivator's whole body shook, and before he could react, the announcing fate brush pecked at his forehead. The essence and blood of the original spirit were wiped out, and only an empty shell was left lying on the ground. Zhang Yan suddenly felt something, and his gaze turned to the corner of the corridor. There was a cultivator who had just come up from the 7th floor. At this moment he saw Zhang Yan kill 3 clear chi cultivators like chickens. He was so scared that his soul almost left his body. How would he dare to fight? He turned around and fled down the stairs. Zhang Yan walked over unhurriedly and went down to the last floor. Looking around, he found that Feng Ji was surrounded by 5 level 1 clear chi cultivators. He held a jade pot in his hand, and when he saw Zhang Yan come down, he drank the wine in the pot in one gulp and then threw it away. Then he put his hands behind his back, shook his head, and sighed, "Zhang Yan, you are too impatient. One more day, just now is the time for you to return." He turned around, waved his hand in high spirits, and said, "Kill them." Just as everyone's flying swords rose into the air, they didn't know that the sky above them darkened. When they looked up, there was a rumble and a large inkstone came crashing down. The entire 7th floor of the tower shook, and when they looked again, the 5 people, including Feng Ji, and their flying swords and artifacts were all crushed into powder. Stretching out his hand, Zhang Yan took back the soul-calming inkstone and swept his gaze around him. Then he walked towards the upper level with an expressionless face. As he walked, waves of mist gradually spread out from beneath his feet, and everywhere he passed became a place filled with mist. At this moment, on the 7th floor of the tower, Wu Zhen looked uneasy and sighed, "Junior Su, this time I have been dragged down by you. Originally, it was just that you would bring me to introduce Senior Su, and I would teach him a lesson. How did it turn into killing this person?" In front of him, a cultivator in his 30s smiled and said, "Senior brother, do you really think that I, Su Yang, would make a big fuss over a spirit pet? I have no interest in Zhang Yan, I just need his identity as a direct disciple. For my eldest brother's big matter, even if it was someone else who came, I would still kill them." Wu Zhen had a difficult expression and said, "Junior brother, you are playing with fire. What kind of status do direct disciples have? If this news is leaked, not to mention me, even your Su clan probably won't be able to withstand the power of lightning, right?" Su Yang smiled meaningfully and said, "How could this matter be leaked? At that time, we will all be dead." Wu Zhen stood up in shock, but when he saw Su Yang's expression, he thought about it and immediately understood the meaning behind the other's words. He sat down dejectedly, and shook his head with a bitter smile, and said, "In this case, I won't be able to return to the Yudsong sect." Su Yang laughed out loud and said, "So what? Senior brother Wu only comes from the frost chart, and your clan has long fallen. It doesn't matter if you don't go back. My Su clan has the intention to include all the geniuses in the world, and we don't care about one's background like the other clans. As long as you have talent, you can enter my Su clan. Senior brother Wu has cultivated for 35 years, and now you are already a level 3 clear Qi realm cultivator. You are more than 2 levels higher than me, and I don't want to miss out on such a talent. Hearing Su Yang's words, Wu Zhen hesitated for a moment, and suddenly felt Su Yang's gaze fall on his face. He was startled and thought to himself, Su Yang also brought a few clear Qi realm cultivators with him. Although their cultivation levels are not as high as mine, with his great family background, he definitely has magical treasures with him. If I don't comply today, I will really lose my life. Thinking of this, he didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He got off the chair and bowed and said, I, Wu Zhen, am willing to listen to Erlang's instructions from now on. Without saying anything else, he raised his hand and swore an oath. Su Yang's face lit up, and he thought that this person really knew how to do things. He quickly helped him up, and in order to win Wu Zhen's heart, he smiled mysteriously and said, Since senior brother Wu is already one of us, there is no harm in me telling you. Do you know why my eldest brother wants to take over Xinjiang stream? Wu Zhen said, I hope Erlang can dispel my doubts. Su Yang smiled mysteriously and said in a low voice, Many years ago, my Su clan's ancestor found out from a secret place that in Xinjiang stream, under the palace of 9 winding streams, there is an azure dragon that has cultivated for tens of thousands of years, and there is also a true dragon residence. Old Carp Chu Bo has occupied this place for hundreds of years in order to find the entrance, but he didn't know the method, so he never succeeded. If my Su clan occupies this place, those who are fated can immediately refine this azure dragon's remains into an outer body incarnation, and this residence can also become the foundation of my Su clan. Wu Zhen was shocked by this news, and immediately understood the meaning behind the other's words. He looked at him in shock and said hoarsely, Su clan has the heart to stand on its own? Su Yang stood up, looked at the bright moon outside the window, and said boldly, My Su clan's spirit is to aspire to the 9 continents of the world. How can a mere sect of a continent contain us? Wu Zhen took a deep breath and suppressed the churning emotions in his chest. Although Su Yang's words were a bit too arrogant, the Su clan was able to develop into one of the major clans in 1,000 years, so it did have some qualifications to be arrogant. He immediately stood up and cupped his hands and said, Since Erlang has the ambition to reach the clouds, I, Wu Zhen, am willing to follow your lead. But at this time, a clear voice came from the door, Little rascal, you dare to talk nonsense about seizing the heavens? Chapter 54. The moment this voice rang out, the 2 people in the room were startled. Almost at the same time, a speck of green light pierced through the wooden wall and flew in front of Su Yang. His eyes were wide open and his face was filled with fear. Seeing that he couldn't dodge, a speck of white light suddenly flew out from his chest. With a ding sound, not only did it stop the shuttle, but it also scattered the spiritual energy attached to the shuttle, causing it to return. Su Yang came back to his senses and shouted, It's Zhang Yan. Ever since he was born, he had only been in charge of the family's internal affairs. He had never had the experience of fighting with anyone. That thing just now was most likely the legendary Divine Rui shuttle. Knowing that he had just taken a trip to the gates of hell, he instinctively covered his head and hid behind a thick wooden pillar. At this moment, the sky was filled with fog, and in an instant, the surroundings became a vast expanse of white. Hiding behind the pillar, Su Yang was bewildered. If Zhang Yan suddenly appeared here, then where were the people he had arranged below? Why was there no movement at all? That's right. He slapped his forehead. That treasure his eldest brother had given him might be able to restrain Zhang Yan. After fumbling around in his sleeves for a while, he finally grabbed something. Suddenly, a sense of danger caused all the muscles in his body to tense up. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the green light flying toward him once more. That shocking aura was something that not even the dense fog could hide. Although Su Yang was panicking, he had a magic treasure in his hand, so he couldn't help but feel a bit more confident. He closed his eyes and stiffly tossed the item in his hand into the air. As soon as the item appeared in the air, It began to glow brightly, revealing itself to be a dazzling copper mirror. At this moment, the surface of the mirror was flipped over, and a dazzling beam of light shone down below. This beam of light passed through the thick mist as if it didn't exist, passing through the wooden pillar and firmly locking the divine Rui shuttle in place. Su Yang leaned on the wooden pillar and poked his head out to take a look. He saw the divine Rui shuttle struggling left and right in the light, but it couldn't escape. His nervous expression eased a little, and he laughed wildly through the fog. "Zhang Yan, I knew you had a meddle with treasure. It really is the divine Rui shuttle." Before he could finish speaking, he felt his hair stand on end. A cloud-patterned brush emerged from the fog. He couldn't help but open his mouth in shock. In a daze, it seemed like it was already at the tip of his nose. It turned out that when Zhang Yan saw the divine Rui shuttle being blocked by some unknown treasure, even the spiritual energy attached to it was scattered. He immediately realized that one treasure wouldn't be able to do anything to the opponent, so this time, he planned to use one in the open and one in the dark. On the surface, he was using the divine Rui shuttle to attract the treasure while secretly using the brush to take its life. However, his cultivation level wasn't high enough, so he couldn't use both treasures at the same time. As a result, there was a slight difference between the two treasures and the effect was a bit worse. Seeing that Su Yang was about to be hit by the brush, his body trembled and the white light from before flew out to meet it. The two collided, and the brush's attack failed. The light on the brush dissipated and it returned to Zhang Yan's hand. Su Yang's two attacks didn't do anything, but at this moment, his heart was filled with endless fear. This treasure was given to him by his big brother, Su Yihong. It was said that it could block at least 3 attacks from treasures. However, after every 3 attacks, it needed to be refined by his life essence and spirit liquid before it could be used again. Right now, it had already been hit twice, but it seemed like this Zhang Yan had more treasures on him. If Zhang Yan didn't care about anything else, at most 2 more attacks would be enough to kill him. He immediately had the thought of escaping, but he was only at the first layer of chi clarity. The gold magnetic copper mirror still needed to be supported by his true essence and couldn't be moved at all. Otherwise, once the divine Rui shuttle left his grasp, he would immediately die. At this moment of life and death, he couldn't care less about his elegance and hysterically shouted, "Senior Martial Brother Wu, Senior Martial Brother Wu, where are you? Why aren't you attacking? If I die, the Su clan won't let you go." The moment the fog spread, Wu Zhen retreated to the corner of the wall at top speed. His expression was extremely grave. Zhang Yanyan's ability to silently ascend to the 7th floor of the tower was enough to prove that this person's skills were extraordinary. How could he dare to be careless? After retreating to the corner, he calmed down a bit. At this moment, when he heard Su Yang suddenly shout, he couldn't help but frown. A trace of disgust flashed through his eyes. At this moment, his decision to rely on Su Yang was somewhat shaken. But now wasn't the time to think so much. He had just sworn his loyalty to Su Yang, so he really couldn't let Su Yang be killed in front of him. He pinched his fingers together and used a mouthful of pure and turbid qi to use the secret resolve technique of his clan. Suddenly, the fog in front of him swayed as if it had been blown by a large fog. It immediately thinned a lot, and with his eyesight, he could vaguely make out the scenery. Suddenly, there seemed to be a figure flashing in front of him. Wu Zhen's eyes flashed. How could he miss this opportunity? With a loud shout, the flying sword in his hand flew out and pierced towards the opponent. Although Su Yang was only at the first layer of clear qi, he was still a disciple of the Su clan. It was inevitable that he wouldn't have a magic treasure on him. Zhang Yan originally wanted to use lightning speed to get rid of him first, but he didn't expect that this person would have a treasure that could restrain the Rui spirit shuttle. Moreover, it was even able to block his life decree brush. But he also knew that any treasure that could fly out to protect oneself would only respond to magic treasures. Thus, he decided to take the initiative and assassinate this person at close range. However, he had only taken a few steps when he felt a ripple in the fog. Looking back, he saw a flying sword flying towards him. This flying sword was incomparably fast and arrived in front of him in an instant. It was already too late for him to use his life decree brush. At this critical moment, Zhang Yan opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of Kuan's spirit turbid qi. With a dang sound, the flying sword's momentum paused slightly. Before the first mouthful of turbid qi was finished, Zhang Yan spat out a second mouthful. It hit the flying sword again and finally caused it to fly diagonally to the other side. However, when the two mouthfuls of turbid qi returned to his chest, they were only a small portion of what they were originally and could no longer move. Seeing that the flying sword was still in the air and seemed like it was about to fly over, Zhang Yan staked everything on one throw and spat out the third mouthful of turbid qi that had yet to be completely refined. This was a mixture of heavy fiendish qi, and the originally black turbid qi suddenly had a black-red color. However, he didn't expect that it would unexpectedly work this time. With a rip sound, the treasure light of the flying sword dimmed and it swayed in the air as if it was drunk. Wu Zhen's expression changed and he roared, "You dare to taint my magic sword!" He formed a spell with his fingers and the originally swaying flying sword shook up and slashed down again. This time, Zhang Yan couldn't dodge and the flying sword pierced through his right shoulder. However, just as the tip of the sword pierced a small part of his shoulder, he reached out with one hand and grabbed the sword, preventing it from going any further. With this opening, he flicked a black inkstone at Wu Zhen. Without even looking, he turned his head and charged at Suom. As this inkstone flew out, it immediately turned into a huge black inkstone 50 feet wide in the air and pressed down on Wu Zhen's head. Soul-suppressing inkstone? Wu Zhen's expression changed drastically, and he raised his head to expel a burst of white qi, within which was a faint hint of reddish-golden light. He made a hand seal, and the streak of white qi flashed before manifesting a tortoiseshell projection that shielded him from the oncoming attack. Rumble! The phantom shattered and he let out a muffled groan as he retreated 7 or 8 steps, shattering a dozen or so floor tiles. He then reached out and pressed against the wall. With a creaking sound, a wall pillar was forcibly pushed in. Only then did he stop. A mouthful of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Su Ong looked in front of him in horror. He saw Zhang Yan, who had a flying sword stuck in his shoulder, rushing towards him as if nothing had happened. His heart was torn apart and he let out a loud cry. He no longer cared about holding the Rui spirit shuttle in place and turned around to flee. Behind him, Zhang Yan leaped up and pulled out the flying sword from his shoulder. Then, with a slash, a head flew into the sky and crashed into the opposite wall before bouncing back to the ground and rolling away. The headless corpse ran a few steps forward and fell to the ground with a thud. With Su Yang's death, the copper mirror in midair lost control and its spiritual light dimmed. It fell to the ground and was caught by Zhang Yan. The Rui spirit shuttle's restraints were removed and it fell back into his hands. Wu Zhen had just been shaken by the soul-suppressing inkstone to the point that his blood and qi were in turmoil and his soul was shaken. He rejoiced, but he was also a little afraid. He recognized the soul-suppressing inkstone that originally belonged to Duda and knew how powerful it was. If he was locked in place by it, his soul would immediately scatter and his body would rot away. He could block it once, but would he be able to block it a second time? Zhang Yan's treasures were endless. He had already lost the will to fight and immediately thought of escaping. Now that he saw Su Ong being killed, how could he dare to stay? Without hesitation, he turned around and smashed through the wall. A mysterious seed of light attached itself to the sword, and the sword light wrapped around his body. Then he flew out like a rainbow. But before he could get out of the range of the tower, he heard a cold snort in his ears. A streak of green light instantly appeared behind him and pierced through the rainbow light with a single strike. After 2 more shuttles, he let out a loud cry and lost his life. He fell from the sky. The divine shuttle spun again and took advantage of the momentum to scatter his original spirit. Only then was he summoned back. At this moment, the entire tower had been completely wiped out by Zhang Yan. He expressionlessly tore off a piece of his sleeve and wrapped it around the wound on his shoulder. Then, he took out some medicinal pills from his cosmos sleeve pouch and swallowed them. When the flying sword had cut him, its spiritual qi had already been mostly used up. It had only managed to injure him because of the residual force. However, he would be completely healed after a day or 2 of rest. He just hadn't expected that the last bit of heavy fiend chi would actually be able to stain his opponent's flying sword. He didn't know why, but he probably wouldn't be able to figure it out right now, so he put it aside for now. He walked forward and first searched Wu Zhen's corpse. Then he took out the talisman that controlled the tower's restrictions. With a wave of his hand, the direction of the tower's flight immediately changed. Only then did he relax. After carefully searching the two people's bodies, he discovered that there was nothing on Wu Zhen other than some medicinal pills. However, there was a Cosmos sleeve pouch on Su Yang's body. Just as he was about to check what was inside, he felt the entire tower shake and sway as if it had collided with something. Chapter 55. Zhang Yan walked out of the railing and saw a red light following behind him. It was obviously a mystic light realm cultivator. There was also a bit of golden light coming out of the red light from time to time, hitting the restrictions of the tower repeatedly. It was obvious that it was a treasure. In just a few hits, the light around the tower dimmed a little. If this continued, the restrictions would completely collapse in less than 4 hours. Zhang Yan laughed and said, "I originally wanted Luo Xiao to make arrangements, but you came to me yourself. Don't blame me." He waved the talisman and controlled the tower to fly in the direction he sensed. However, he didn't care about this person's actions at all. If there was someone maintaining the restrictions of the tower, even if this person had a treasure, he might not be able to do anything to him. However, Zhang Yan was afraid that this person would go back and call for reinforcements after seeing that he couldn't do anything to the restrictions. If that was the case, he might not be able to stop them. Dealing with one person was better than dealing with a group of people. Thus, he just followed this person and didn't do anything as the restrictions were peeled away layer by layer. In the eyes of cultivators, the pagoda could be seen clearly from dozens of miles away. When He Fong was gradually approaching, he saw the direction of the pagoda suddenly change. He suspected that something might have happened, so he hurried over. However, it wasn't convenient for him to speak while flying, so he used the hammer to test it. Seeing that the tower didn't stop and continued to fly in another direction, he was even more certain of his previous judgment. Because Su Yihong's younger brother was in the tower, and this was the first important task that Su Yihong had given him, he didn't want to mess it up. In a hurry, he didn't hold back anymore and used the hammer to attack the chi-gathering gourd at the top of the tower. If this gourd was damaged, then half of the restrictions on the tower would be gone. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, calmly returned to the tower. He first searched his Cosmos sleeve pouch and found many things. He put them away and searched Su Yihong's headless corpse. Not long after, a circular jade pendant appeared in his hand. He thought to himself, could this be the treasure that blocked the Rui God shuttle and the fate-declaring brush? He merely took a few glances at it, yet he noticed that the glow on it was dim as if it was covered in a layer of gray mist. It was obvious that this treasure wasn't unharmed in the battle earlier. Because the owner of this treasure was dead, the blood essence within it had completely vanished. When he saw this, he suddenly thought of something. He stretched his hand into his sleeve and withdrew the copper mirror, and he couldn't help but nod after taking a look. All magic treasures had their own spiritual nature. After refining their blood essence, most of them only needed to attach a bit of spiritual energy to them and they would be able to control it freely. Su Yihong had clearly only obtained this bronze mirror recently and had not had the time to refine it. Otherwise, today's battle would not have been so easy. At this time, Zhang Yan intentionally or unintentionally glanced at a place, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He casually took out a piece of beautiful jade from his Cosmos sleeve, threw it on the ground, and said, "Junior brother Su, don't hide anymore. If you don't want your soul to scatter, you can come here to deposit your origin spirit." Not long after the voice fell, a flickering original spirit floated out from the corner, came to the side of the beautiful jade, and went into it. This was Su Yihong's spirit. Just now, in order to chase after Wu Zhen, Zhang Yan hadn't been able to kill it. Now that he thought about it, this person still had some use. Holding the jade in his hand, he looked at the faintly discernible little person. It was exactly the same as the original Su Yihong, but at this moment, it was looking at him with fear. Zhang Yan smiled and walked to the railing of the tower. He pointed up and said, "Let me ask you, Do you know who this person is? If you say anything false, I will destroy your soul. Su Yang had lost his physical body, and without a place to store his spirit, even if he was a cultivator, he would only be able to last 7 or 8 days. Furthermore, the person in front of him could wipe him off the face of this world at any time. Therefore, he only took a glance before answering honestly, I don't know this person, but looking at his face, he looks similar to the cultivator under my big brother, Higua. He should be his younger brother, Fong. I heard that this person is a cultivator at the first level of the mystic light realm, but I don't know what his cultivation is right now. Zhang Yan then pointed at the golden light that was attacking the tower and asked, What treasure is that? Su Yang replied, That should be the purple heart-stopping hammer. It originally belonged to Fong's big brother, Higua, and it is used to destroy flying swords. Zhang Yan looked at him and suddenly said, If I use your spirit as a hostage and ask this person to leave, do you think he will agree? Hearing this, Su Yang shouted in fear, Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As if he had already expected this, Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Oh? Fong definitely won't dare to make a decision about me, and he will definitely return to report to my big brother. However, if my big brother knows that my spirit still exists, not only will he not pity me, he will only be worried that the secret of the Su clan will be leaked. He will definitely think of a way to kill me. Moreover, I have ruined the clan's plan, and according to the clan's rules, my soul will be destroyed. Su Yang kowtowed in the jade and begged, Right now, I am only a remnant spirit. I hope that Senior Martial Brother will let me go. If Senior Martial Brother has any questions, I will tell you the truth. Although his cultivation was a bit lacking, his mind was clear and he could see the situation clearly. If it was someone else, they would have already declared their value. Furthermore, he didn't think that Zhang Yan would let him go, that would be a fool's dream. Zhang Yan laughed loudly and said, So, if I die, you won't be able to live either? Su Yang thought about it and said dejectedly, That's right. Zhang Yan nodded, and then he changed the topic. What exactly is that jade pendant in your possession? Su Yang hurriedly replied, That is the Fate Jade Tablet. It was given to me by my big brother. It can block 3 times. After 3 times, it needs to be refined with blood jade liquid for 81 days before it can be used again. Zhang Yan made a sound and didn't say anything else. After a while, Su Yang sneaked a glance at Zhang Yan and said carefully, There is one thing that I hope Senior Martial Brother can investigate. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, Speak. Su Yang thought about his words and put on an extremely humble attitude. Although that Fong is still following us, if he has a sudden impulse and turns back to call my big brother over, it will be a dangerous situation for Senior Martial Brother. He felt that he had to be useful to Zhang Yan. Just now, he could show his value so that he wouldn't be eliminated after he was used up. Zhang Yan agreed. That's right, we have to guard against this. However, I can test this person's heart first before making plans. Su Yang had a surprised expression. Oh, how will Senior Martial Brother test? Zhang Yan smiled and said, Let me see what I can do. He came to the lowest level of the pagoda and waved his talisman. The restrictions on the 7th level instantly dissipated. He took out a jade pendant from his sleeve and threw it out. Fong was thinking of ways to break the restrictions, but when he saw that one of the restrictions had been opened, his gaze couldn't help but freeze. He saw a cultivator he didn't know standing there and seemed to have thrown something out. Only then did he react and the heart-stopping hammer in his hand smashed over. Zhang Yan waved his hand and closed the restrictions again. The pagoda shook, but he was unscathed. Fong was puzzled. He didn't know what the other party was risking his life to throw out. He hesitated for a moment and turned back to use his profound light to pick it up. However, he found that it was just a useless piece of jade. He frowned and shook it off before catching up again. Who knew that before he could get close again, the restrictions would open again? Zhang Yan smiled at him and threw another item down. Fong was puzzled. What was that? Was that person just playing with him? It swayed back and forth in the air. He gritted his teeth and turned back to catch it. When he brought it up to his eyes and saw that it was still a useless piece of jade, he couldn't help but be furious. He had the urge to tear the other party apart. After walking in this manner for a while, Zhang Yan would throw something every time there was a gap. He Fong gritted his teeth and said, "There is a saying in the art of war in the mortal world, fake is real, real is fake. You must have a purpose for doing this, I must see it clearly." Therefore, he would turn back in a fit of pique every time to see what exactly Zhang Yan had thrown down. He didn't want to miss anything. About a dozen times later, Zhang Yan returned to the pagoda and said with a smile, "I already know He Fong's temperament. This person is more suspicious and less scheming. He's also stubborn and won't turn back until he hits a brick wall. In this case, we don't have to worry too much." Su Yang saw that Zhang Yan had tested He Fong's temperament by throwing bait, and he couldn't help sighing in admiration. His expression became even more ingratiating. Zhang Yan looked at him indifferently and said, "Junior brother Su, I have a way to get rid of this person. If you are willing to help me, I will choose a good corporeal body for you in the future. How about it?" Su Yang said without hesitation, "I am willing to help senior brother." However, he had thought it through. Putting aside Zhang Yan's promise, he was like a fish on a chopping block. Bargaining would only make the other party unhappy. He could only cooperate with him just now. There was a chance of survival. "Alright, I will tell you. Later on, you will do this," Zhang Yan said in a low voice. Su Yang pondered for a moment and realized that although this matter was very risky, the possibility of success was very high. Furthermore, there was no room for him to refuse. He gritted his teeth and immediately knelt down. "I am willing to listen to senior brother's instructions." At this moment, after 4 hours of continuous attacks, the restrictions on the pagoda could no longer withstand it and gradually dispersed. He Fong was overjoyed when he saw this. He struck the tower again with the heart-calming hammer. Boom! Another series of cracking sounds could be heard. The tower that had lost its protection was no different from an ordinary object. It completely collapsed. Wood shavings, pillars, bricks, and tiles fell from the sky. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, had a leisurely expression as he floated in the air and slowly descended. He Fong had traveled for an entire night and used his magic treasures to attack for more than 4 hours. No matter how strong his magic power was, he was still exhausted. With just one glance, he recognized that Zhang Yan was the person who had teased him. Anger rose in his heart and he shouted, "Junior, hand over your life." Seeing the golden light falling toward him, Zhang Yan threw something over and shouted, "This is Su Yang's origin spirit. Brother He, you must keep it well." Su Yang shouted, "Senior martial brother He, quickly save me." He Fong was startled and quickly made a hand seal to retrieve his magic treasure. But how could it be so easy? However, he couldn't bear the responsibility of destroying Su Yang's origin spirit. In a moment of panic, he let out an "ah," and the mysterious light on his body trembled. A red light flashed out and stopped the falling heart-stopping hammer. However, it was the same as taking his own hammer. He immediately coughed out a mouthful of blood and his eyes became blood red. Seeing this, Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. He waved his sleeve and the Rui God shuttle in his hand flew out. He Fong suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Seeing a green ray flying toward him, he immediately realized that the origin of this object was not simple. In a panic, he summoned the mysterious light around his body to block it. For a moment, the red light shone brightly and he finally managed to stop the Rui spirit shuttle. However, before he could recover, the light above his head seemed to be blocked by something. He looked up and couldn't help but exclaim, "Soul-calming inkstone?" He knew the power of this treasure inkstone. In a moment of desperation, he didn't have time to think about anything else. The mysterious light gathered on his fists and he punched upwards. With a bang, the inkstone was actually knocked back. Just when he was exerting his full strength, 2 black needle lights silently pierced through his back. His face suddenly stiffened, and his eyes suddenly widened. In a trance, a beautiful face flashed in front of him. A black profound light wrapped around his body and took away the lower half of his body. Blood and internal organs scattered in the air. He opened his mouth and seemed to intend to say something. However, the expanse of black light was unwilling to let him go. It coiled around him like a coiled snake, and then it squeezed and ground, forcefully stirring up the remaining flesh, blood, and true spirit within him. A snow-white hand gently caught Hifang's hammer. An enchanting woman stood on a black cloud. Her cheeks blushed and her eyes were sad. She said to Zhang Yan, "My husband, you can call me here and ask me to leave. I'm afraid that I won't be able to break the essence Qi blood oath in this life." Zhang Yan laughed loudly and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, have you heard of the saying, when a man achieves the Tao, his chickens and dogs rise with him? If I achieve the Tao in the future, I won't let you down." Chapter 56. Dang, I found Erlang. The cultivator who came in a hurry lowered his head, not daring to look at Su Yihong. "Bring him up." Su Yihong's expression did not change, but those who were familiar with him could see the uncontrollable murderous intent in his eyes. The cultivator who was standing beside them waved his hand and two muscular men walked forward, trembling with fear. One of them carried a severed body while the other carried a head. Su Yihong's gaze was like a sharp blade as he stared at the head, and the people standing next to him felt a chill in their hearts. At this time, only Higwa dared to speak. He whispered, "Ding, the bodies of Erlang and the others are incomplete. Obviously, they have been tampered with. I can't tell what kind of weapon did it." Su Yihong snorted coldly, "Did you find out who was left out?" Higwa said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan." The chill in Su Yihong's eyes grew stronger, and the people around him unconsciously took a few steps back. Higwa, however, looked ashamed and whispered, "Deng, how should we deal with this place?" Feiyao Pagoda was destroyed by a heart-striking hammer, and this trace was not difficult to see. Moreover, they only needed to check to know that it was Higwa's magic weapon. He also had a close relationship with the Su clan, so they had to clean up this place. Otherwise, anyone could associate it with the Su clan. Hifang left with the hammer. Not only did he not know whether he was alive or dead, but he also caused such a scene. Higwa felt ashamed to face Su Yihong. Su Yihong looked down at the broken bricks and tiles on the ground under his feet and waved his hand irritably. Higwa understood and sighed. He turned around and said, "You all should clean up this place according to what you said before. Remember to bring the corpses of the monster cultivators here. Don't leave the slightest flaw." Although they originally wanted to frame the water demons of Nine Tune Stream Palace, they were just following their original plan. However, they were clearly the ones who suffered a loss this time, but they still had to clean up the mess. Everyone present felt depressed. Su Yihong turned his head and looked at a cultivator with thin eyebrows and eyes, who looked like a dwarf, and said, "Mr. Yang, this Su asks, what should we do next?" Due to Zhang Yan's sudden actions, he had already disrupted his original plans. He was still hesitating as to what he should do. Mr. Yang pulled his sparse beard and said slowly, "Deng, at this moment, we should use Erlang's death as an excuse to attack immediately and take down Shinjin Stream in one fell swoop." Su Yihong frowned and said, "But using Erlang as an excuse to fight is for personal, not for public. If we lose the righteousness, the sect master will find trouble for our Su clan." The Su clan was not ready to turn against the Yingtsong sect yet. Neither Ji nor Ji Jiushang could choose to start the war at this time. If they use with the sect, they would be with the Su clan, and the sect but also they Su and in it. Mr. Yang said seriously, "Dang, if we occupy Jinlong Manor, the Su clan will immediately have the foundation to establish a sect. When the time comes, we can advance or retreat, and the gains outweigh the losses. At this moment, the arrow on the bowstring has to be fired, and we must not hesitate." Su Yang thought for a moment, then slowly shook his head and said, "Although Mr.'s words are reasonable, you have forgotten that we can first take down Shinjin Stream and then find an excuse." After a pause, he said, "Higwa." Higwa stood up, bowed, and said, "Deng, please instruct me. Take a few more people to patrol the surroundings of Yingtsong sect. Within these 10 days, if anyone suspicious comes to the mountain gate, kill without mercy." Higwa accepted the order and said, "Yes." Su Yihong looked around and said, "Where is Miao Kuan?" Here. A short and stocky cultivator stood up, but the expression on his face was smiling, completely unlike the other cultivators who looked nervous. Su Yihong looked at him, frowned, and said, "I will also give you 10 days. Take a few people to search in the direction of the Shui kingdom, and if you encounter this person, kill him." Miao Kuan casually cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Understood." After the arrangements were made, Su Yihong stepped on the jade steps of the Golden Palace, flung the Qilin cloak behind him, and said loudly, "The rest of you, immediately attack Shenjin Stream with me, and avenge Erlang." Everyone agreed loudly, and dozens of mysterious lights rose into the sky, following the Golden Palace, and killed their way in the direction of Juku Creek Palace. 3 months later, at the border of the Shui Kingdom in the Dang region, Zhang Yan's sleeves fluttered, and he was flying with the wind. 2 Qis surrounded him, accompanied by clouds and mist, making him look like an immortal. However, Luo Xiao, who was flying in front of him, frequently looked back and said, "Fellow Zhang, this technique is too slow. Why don't I use the mysterious light to carry you? It will only take a few days to reach the Shui Kingdom." Zhang Yan, however, said unhurriedly, "There are still 9 months to the birthday of the Shui Kingdom's ruler, and it is rare for this place to be so peaceful. Why don't I cultivate for a few more months, and it will not be too late to go after I reach the 3rd tier of clear qi." Half a month ago, he had used the evil qi in his qi openings to reach the 2nd tier of clear qi, and this was all thanks to the moon-seizing jade amulet. It allowed him to cultivate at night far faster than usual, and the speed of cultivation was more than doubled. In the later stages, he could cultivate a mouthful of turbid qi almost every day. Now that he was advancing towards the 3rd tier of clear qi, heavenly rain descending, he already had 3 mouthfuls of turbid qi in his chest. Once this tangible and intangible qi became one, there would be a change of yin and yang, and the spells he could use in the future would not be as simple as before. Luo Xiao was puzzled. "If that is so, fellow Taoist, why must you go to the Shui Kingdom?" Zhang Yan did not answer. He understood that if he wanted to return to the Yingtsong sect in the future, he would have to go to the Shui Kingdom of the Dang region. At the very least, he would have to make a trip there. Otherwise, as a member of the diplomatic mission, if he did not go to celebrate the birthday, it would be hard to avoid Ji Jiushang using this as an excuse to attack the Yingtsong sect in the future. As for returning to the sect to explain the reason, that was just a joke. He did not have that much loyalty to the Yingtsong sect. Moreover, even if he risked his life to return to the sect and completely ruin the Su clan's plan, it would only make them use all their strength to deal with him, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Luo Zhao's beautiful eyes wandered, and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang is not far from the 3rd tier of clear qi. Have you decided what Tao you will walk in the future?" Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "I have read a little about it in Taoist books, but it is like a mountain covered in clouds and fog. It is not very clear. I hope fellow Taoist Luo can give me a pointer or two." Luo Xiao said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you human body cultivators always like to play these mysteries, but let me tell you, when a cultivator reaches the 3rd tier of clear qi and condenses the mysterious seed of light, they need to decide on their future Tao, and the road to longevity has 3 main Tao." Zhang Yan's attention was immediately attracted. "Which 3? Luo Xiao gathered her sleeves and successively extended 3 fingers like green onions and said, "The first is the Tao of Strength. Those who walk the Tao of Strength use external medicine and boil the inner Dan to cultivate an indestructible golden body. At the peak, they can overturn rivers and seas and spit out the earth and swallow the sky. The second is the Tao of Qi. Those who walk the Tao of Qi breathe in the essence and concentrate on the Tao, achieving the unity of heaven and man. At the peak, they can incarnate into tens of thousands of things and become immortal and indestructible. The third is the Tao of Qi. Those who walk the Tao of Qi understand the wisdom, understand the nature, and thoroughly study the mysteries of heaven and earth. At the peak, they can transform into tens of thousands of things and move the stars and the moon." Zhang Yan thought with rapt attention and slowly nodded. Then he asked, "Which path does fellow Taoist Luo take?" Luo Xiao smiled bitterly and sighed, "I, a demon cultivator, lack words, and lack Tao. so I walk the Tao of Strength. It's only because I happened to obtain a Taoist book, and now I'm walking the Tao of Qi. I wonder where my next step will be? Although the three main Tao of longevity are different routes to the same destination, those who cultivate the Tao of Qi need to have the inheritance of a superior cultivation method, and other than the big sects and aristocratic families, it is difficult for ordinary cultivators to obtain this. Even among the demon race, there are only a few who walk this path. As for the Tao of Qi, ordinary cultivators only cultivate it because it is too difficult to rely on this path to reach the Tao. They need to understand the mysteries of heaven and earth, and thus understand all things. Even among the human body cultivators, there is only 1 in 10,000. There is a saying in the Taoist book, 16 numbers are 1 Tao. In other words, a cultivator needs to use 16 breaths of spiritual qi to cast a Tao technique. If the cultivation method you cultivate is of low quality, to the extent that your spiritual qi is less than 16, then unless you find another Tao technique to cultivate, you will never be able to cast a Tao technique in your lifetime. As for those cultivators who can use 1 qi as 1 Tao, and can change their divine abilities with just a finger, they are only heard of in legends. Therefore, most cultivators only slightly dabble in this Tao, and most of them walk the path of the Tao of Qi, and among the demon cultivators, there are even fewer of them. But the Tao of Strength is different. It mainly refines the body, and not only can it bring out the natural advantages of demon cultivators, but when it is cultivated to a high level, it will not be afraid of magic treasures or flying swords. It is undoubtedly the best choice for demon cultivators. If Zhang Yan's cultivation improves, he will also have to stand at this fork in the road, so he has no choice but to consider this matter in advance. He can't help but ponder on the cloud. The mysterious light on Luo Zhao's body spread out, and like a picture scroll, it connected to the thick cloud under Zhang Yan's feet. He walked over leisurely, smiled, and waved his hand in front of his eyes. He said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, actually, you don't have to worry about delaying your Tao when you go to the Water Nation. Do you know that Monarch Ji's birthday is celebrated with the Elixir Gathering, and he is even using a primordial metal life fruit book as a prize? This is a superior technique of the Tao of Strength." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly, and he said, "Could it be that there is some inside story behind this?" He could tell that most alchemists are human cultivators, and if they want to set up a prize, it should be the Tao of Qi or the Tao of Magic. Why would they use a book of the Tao of Strength? Luo Xiao didn't expect Zhang Yan to react so quickly. After being stunned for a while, she nodded and said, "Yes, Monarch Ji has a young son named Ji Zhang. This person's mother is a human cultivator, and most of his demon blood was refined by his mother in the womb. So even though he is a demon, he is still human. He once went out to learn alchemy from an expert, and this competition." When she said this, she stopped, and only smiled without saying anything. When Zhang Yan heard this, he actually already understood the meaning behind Luo Zhao's words. He smiled and said, "I understand now. So it's not that Ji Jiushang likes to make a big deal out of himself, but it's to build up his son's reputation. Everyone else is just a foil." Luo Xiao covered her mouth and laughed and said, "Exactly. After hearing this, does fellow Taoist Zhang feel bored?" Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "How is it boring? Since Monarch Ji has announced to the world that he is summoning all the alchemists in the world to live together in one hall, of course everyone will have to rely on their own methods and schemes. When the time comes, it's still unknown who will come out on top." Luo Zhao's beautiful eyes widened, and she took a step back. She looked up and down at Zhang Yan and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, could it be that you want to win the book?" Chapter 57. The water country of Dang Domain was close to the vast East Sea. It was densely covered with reefs and foggy all year round. Fish, beasts, insects, and birds were all huge in size and strange in appearance. They exuded an ancient and wild aura. Here, there was a magnetic force in the earth veins. Not only could metal magic treasures not be used, but it could also disturb spiritual opportunity. The Water Kingdom was surrounded by mountains and had 8 entrances. These entrances were all different. Some were difficult for birds to cross and had to be climbed by ropes. Some were deep in streams and had to be crossed by swimming. Some were surrounded by howling winds and had to be moved slowly. On the other hand, the entrance that Zhang Yan wanted to enter was located halfway up the mountain. It was a cave that was over 60 meters wide, and there was an underground river in it that twisted and turned. If one wasn't an experienced person, it would be impossible to find the true location to enter the Water Kingdom. Every time the tide rose, the boat that was anchored in the shallow water would be lifted up. When the water and the wall were higher, they could enter. The owner of the ship they were on was called Huang Liang. He was a human practitioner at the 3rd level of Clear Qi. He came from a small aristocratic family. Usually, he only transported some rare goods at the entrance and did not ferry people. Because he saw that Zhang Yan was not stingy and seemed to be very generous, and he was also a human practitioner, he was willing to take them on board. He looked ahead and sighed, "Today's tide has passed. I can only bleed a little." This entrance was the safest compared to the other 7 entrances. However, there was one problem. The magnetic force in the earth veins was chaotic and the tide was not fixed. It was very likely that they would miss it. Therefore, some demon cultivators in the water country came up with an idea to pull the boat from above and collect some passage fee. Zhang Yan followed his gaze and saw 2 whale demons that were more than 100 feet tall standing on the wall. They were slowly pulling a big boat up. At this speed, it would take at least half an hour for their turn. At this moment, he saw some demon cultivators on the deck of the nearby boat talking excitedly. He listened and smiled. "I heard that a month ago, Su Yang of the Black Tsang sect killed Uncle Chu of the Shunjin stream to avenge his brother. This Uncle Chu is also a core formation cultivator. Who is this Sui Hong? You actually managed to kill this person? That's because you're weak and inexperienced. This person's talent is outstanding. He's cultivated for less than 40 years and has already reached the core formation stage. Moreover, I heard that he's a rare person among the human cultivators who practices the path of strength. He's already reached the realm of internal and external integration. It's hard for magic treasures and flying swords to hurt him. Naturally, Uncle Chu is no match for him." The Dark Azure sect suddenly launched an attack against Chu Yu's subordinates. I wonder if the 2 sects will start a war again? That's not the case. Su Yang has a personal grudge. Furthermore, it is country Lord Ji's birthday celebration. Why would he use weapons at such a time? Impossible, impossible. When Zhang Yan heard this, he gave Luo Xiao a look. The latter understood, and the 2 of them walked to a corner that no one would notice. Zhang Yan took out a piece of jade from his sleeve and said, "Junior apprentice brother Su, what do you think?" Su Yang bowed in the jade and said, "Senior apprentice brother Zhang, according to eldest brother's personality, he definitely won't let you off so easily. To be safe, I hope that senior apprentice brother will appear in Shui Nation. You'll definitely be able to protect yourself." When Luo Xiao heard this, her willowy eyebrows furrowed and she said coldly, "This person is talking nonsense and wants to harm Lang Jun. Wait for me to disperse his spirit." After she finished speaking, she made a posture to get up. Su Yang was so frightened that he trembled. He kowtowed repeatedly in the jade and shouted at the top of his voice, "Senior apprentice brother, please investigate clearly. Heaven can be my witness, I definitely don't have such intentions." When he saw the scene of Luo Xiao killing He Fang that day, he had a deep impression of it. He knew that this demoness was powerful and would definitely do what she said. However, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Junior apprentice brother Su, don't be afraid. I know that your plan is feasible." When Luo Xiao heard this, she couldn't help but say anxiously, "Lang Jun, now that you've appeared in Shui Nation, wouldn't it be extremely dangerous if the Su clan sends people to kill you?" Zhang Yan smiled confidently and said, "Don't worry, Taoist Luo. I'm here to congratulate Monarch Ji on his birthday. Once I'm here, my identity will be that of the Yu Tsang sect's envoy. During the monarch's birthday, he definitely won't let anything happen to me. Instead, he will send people to protect me. Otherwise, it will only cause a rift between the 2 sections. If Zhang Yan was ambushed on the way back and forth, both sides could still find an excuse to cover it up. However, if he was killed in Shui Nation's territory, then the Yudsong sect would have no choice but to take action. Otherwise, where would the face of a large sect be? Su Yang quickly said, "Yes, yes, yes. Times have changed. My eldest brother is also a smart person. Once senior apprentice brother gains a foothold in Shui Nation, he definitely won't come and provoke senior apprentice brother at this time." Zhang Yan nodded slightly in agreement. Although he and the Su clan were enemies, it was nothing compared to the grand plan of the entire clan. After conquering the Xinjiang stream, the Su clan was doing their best to digest this place. At this time, they were the ones who didn't want anything to happen. What they were most afraid of was that Zhang Yan might know of their plot and jump out to bite them. Therefore, if Zhang Yan could guarantee his own safety and make a public appearance in Shui Nation without mentioning this matter, this in itself was a sign of temporary reconciliation. Even if the Su clan wanted to deal with him, they wouldn't choose this time. As for the other people who died, they weren't true disciples. Perhaps when Zhang Yan returned to the sect, someone would make a fuss about it, but it wasn't something that needed to be considered right now. At this time, they heard a loud, "Hey, hey," coming from the shallow waters. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound and saw a boat lying sideways in a shallow pit. This position was extremely awkward. It was in the belly of a reef pillar. If the tide rose tomorrow, it would definitely be a fragmented situation. More than 10 tall and sturdy demon race members were trying to pull something in the chest-deep water, but the soil under their feet was soft, and they couldn't exert any strength. After pulling for a long time, they could only sink themselves in the mud. A young Yao cultivator standing at the stern seemed to be impatient. He simply jumped off the boat and said, "Get out of the way." As soon as his subordinates heard this, they all dodged. The Yao cultivator raised his neck and opened his mouth. Like a giant whale swallowing water, he sucked up the seawater under the boat in one breath and swallowed it into his mouth like a white water column. After a while, his abdomen bulged. He patted his belly and staggered to the side of the ship. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of water. With a "hua" sound, a huge amount of water rushed down like the opening of a sluice gate. The ship swayed a few times and made a series of creaking sounds. Then, it was washed out of the shallow pit. After it came out, it turned diagonally on the same spot and the hull of the ship righted itself. The owner of the boat, Huang Liang, took a few steps forward and looked attentively. The 9 phases technique of the Reef Prefecture of the Eastern Sea. This is the whale swallowing phase. It's really powerful. From what I see, this person hasn't reached the 3rd tier of clear chi, and at most has only combined 3 mouthfuls of pure and turbid spiritual energy. If this technique is practiced to 12 mouthfuls, he doesn't need to borrow water. He just needs to suck hard, and this giant boat can be lifted into the air and cross this shallow beach. Oh, this person is actually walking the path of Qi Dao? Zhang Yan walked to the guardrail and looked down with interest. Demon cultivators usually practiced the path of strength. In order to enter the path of Dao as soon as possible, after reaching the 2nd tier of clear chi, after each mouthful of pure and turbid spiritual energy, they would refine it into their bones and meridians, merging it with their body. Only then would they break through to the 3rd tier. Apart from some secret techniques, at this time, they were somewhat similar to the human cultivators, but the human cultivators had to rely completely on external objects, so the two could not be mentioned in the same breath. Huang Bao glanced at him and said, "The Reef Prefecture of the Eastern Sea is a rare family among the demon race that has existed for tens of thousands of years. Naturally, they have a lot of techniques to choose from, unlike the other wild races, who have no other path to choose except the path of strength." He turned his head and looked up and down at Zhang Yan again. He chuckled and said, "I see on the head of your Langjun, the clear and turbid spiritual energy is half hidden, and the yin and yang seem to be merging but not merging. They are still intertwining on the canopy, so he should be like this demon, a cultivator in the 2nd tier of clear Qi Dao. If my judgment is correct, he will definitely cleanse his marrow and meridians within this year, reaching the level of heavenly rain descending top. Hee, I wonder if you have chosen your path ahead?" This ship owner had a good eye. Zhang Yan smiled and was about to speak when Huang Bao suddenly sprang a few steps forward, grabbed the edge of the ship, and leaned forward. He said happily, it's my turn. He called for the sailor on the ship and ran to the helm. Just as he was about to steer the ship forward, he heard a shout from not far away. Human cultivators over there, why don't you retreat? The alchemist invited by Shintagong of the Eastern Sea is on my way to see Monarch Ji. Why don't you let us go first? When Huang Bao heard this, he looked back and his expression changed slightly. The person who spoke was the young demon cultivator who spat water vapor to move the ship. Although this person's cultivation level was not as high as his, Huang Bao knew his own strength. If they really fought, he might not be this person's match. Moreover, Shintagong of the Eastern Sea was very famous. He was one of the 18 demon kings of the Eastern Sea, so how could he dare to offend him? The world of demon cultivators was not as particular about etiquette and face as human cultivators. Everything was laid bare on the table. The strong were king, and the weak were prey to the strong. If you had the strength, you could do whatever you wanted, but if you didn't, you could only obediently retreat. Moreover, Huang Bao was a human cultivator, so no one would stand up for him here. If he insisted on being stubborn, he might even lose his life. He couldn't help but curse inwardly and angrily steered the ship, wanting to give way. However, before he could move, Zhang Yan reached out and grabbed Huang Bao's wrist. Wait! Huang Bao was startled, but he didn't look angry. Instead, he sighed and lowered his voice to console, Leng, don't force yourself. This is the country of demon cultivators, and with our few people, we can't fight them. Moreover, if there really is an alchemist on the ship, then he's Monarch Ji's guest, and he was invited by Shintagong. Why don't we retreat for now, so that we don't cause any trouble and harm ourselves? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Boss Huang, please wait for a moment. He took out an item from his sleeve and handed it to Luo Xiao. Fellow Taoist, give this to that alchemist. Luo Xiao took it, and in a flash she appeared on the other's ship. No one could see how she did it, and they couldn't help but be shocked. Only now did they realize how powerful she was. They only saw her say a few words, and the attendant on the other side moved aside to let her enter the cabin. Huang Bao turned around to look at Zhang Yan. Seeing that his expression was calm, Huang Bao's worried heart also relaxed slightly. Not long after, the door to the opposite cabin opened, and Luo Xiao and a white-haired elder walked out together. The elder cupped his hands at Zhang Yan from afar, and said, May I know which great master is on the other side? I've been rude. Can we have a chat? Chapter 58. Under Huang Liang's shocked gaze, Zhang Yan walked to the edge of the ship and returned the old man's salute, saying, I wouldn't dare. I am Zhang Yan, not some grandmaster. Seeing that Zhang Yan was so young, the old man was slightly surprised, but his expression quickly returned to normal. Fellow Taoist Zhang, there is no need to be humble. Your Long Yu pill is odorless and colorless, round like a pearl. It has clearly reached the stage of condensing its energy into one. Even after being exposed to the sun for 100 days, its medicinal strength will not diminish in the slightest. It is a rare good pill, a good medicine. Zhang Yan ordered someone to deliver this pill. From a pill master's point of view, this was a way to show off one's own accomplishments and cultivation, a common way to interact with others. Zhang Yan had indeed refined this pill himself, but during the refinement process, Zhou Chongju had been the one to control the heat, and every step had been completed under his careful guidance. At the same time, Zhou Chongju had not been stingy with the herbs. After 5 or 6 batches of pills had been wasted, this was the last batch that could be considered a high-grade pill. At that time, Zhou Chongju had held this pill and examined it several times before handing it to Zhang Yan with a smile, saying that it was enough to frighten others. The old man swept a few glances over Zhang Yan's face, saying, This old man also has a few pills here that I would like fellow Taoist Zhang to appraise. Hearing this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but look at the old man seriously. Seeing that the old man was motionless with his eyelids drooping, he said, Fine, since fellow Taoist has invited me, would I dare to refuse? This was a very polite invitation from the other party to have a small competition with him. It was a normal competition between people of the same Tao. However, looking at this person's intentions, it seemed that he didn't believe that the pill was refined by him. So he wanted to personally weigh how much he was worth. However, since Zhang Yan wanted to enter the Water Nation as a pill master, he naturally had to put on airs. He thought to himself, it just so happens that I need someone to prove my name, and this person has delivered himself to my doorstep. How appropriate. In the Yao Nation, there were many people with higher cultivation than him. Even if he carried the identity of an envoy of the Black Tsong sect, it might not be much more convenient. However, if he also carried the badge of an alchemist, then things would be very different. In the Yao country, there was a lack of such talents. Adding on the fact that those who trained in the way of strength needed to be watered with external medicine, the word medicine included medicinal pills. Thus, the status of pill masters in the Yao country was above that of ordinary Yao cultivators. There were many pill masters who were not doing well in their sects who came to this place to serve. It was just that high-grade alchemists were all nurtured and strictly controlled by the sect. All kinds of secret techniques and incantations were never passed on to outsiders, so these people could not change the low standard of alchemy in the Yao kingdom. Seeing that Zhang Yan had agreed, the old man waved his hand imposingly. The helmsman understood and steered the boat towards Zhang Yan. Huang Liang was very perceptive. He quickly steered the boat towards that boat. When the two parties were close, he ordered someone to bring 2 long ladders and put them on the edge of the other party's boat. 2 boards were placed on the ladders, and a very simple passage was built on the collar of the boat. On the opposite boat, the young Yao cultivator looked warily at Luo Xiao, who was standing quietly at the side. Then he moved closer to the old man and asked in a low voice, "Elder Ren, can you see where this person is from?" The old man pondered for a moment and said, "Now that King Ji has set up the elixir gathering, talented disciples from home and abroad have all come, like carps crossing the river. However, this person is young. If that pill was really made by him, then he must be from a famous sect. I don't think he is worthy of the 16 major sects of Donghua continent." The geomagnetic field here was chaotic, and it could disrupt spiritual opportunity. If one tried to fly, it was very likely that they would fall from the sky soon. Zhang Yan could not do what Luo Xiao did, so he followed the passage made by the ladders and walked over step by step. When they reached the other party's boat, Luo Xiao took the initiative and stood behind him like a maid. The young Yao cultivator's eyes twitched when he saw this. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "I haven't asked for your name, fellow Taoist?" The old man returned the greeting with an indifferent expression and said, "I'm a Qi cultivator from overseas, Ren Kai." He moved sideways and said, "Please take a seat inside, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan stepped into the cabin and took a few glances. He saw that the decorations were simple, but the decorations on the shelves were very strange. They were all rows of white, sharp teeth. One look and he could feel the murderous aura and the smell of blood. Ren Kai saw that he was paying attention, so he explained, "They are all demons from Donghai. In the Water Nation, there are a few clan leaders who like them, so they brought some here. Please, fellow Taoist." The two of them sat down, and Luo Xiao and the young Yao cultivator each stood behind the two of them. Ren Kai and Zhang Yan exchanged a few more pleasantries. Only now did she know that Zhang Yan was from Yutsong's sect, but she didn't dare to underestimate him. She first returned Zhang Yan's long yu pill, then pushed a brocade box in front of him. She looked at him and cupped her hands, saying, "Please enlighten me, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan took the box and opened it. He found that there were 3 white mud pills inside. From their appearance, they didn't look like any of the pills recorded in the pill manual. But it didn't matter, because all pill refiners had their own secret pills, so it wasn't strange that he didn't recognize them. It was just that these 3 pills were exactly the same in terms of color, taste, and appearance, which was a little strange. These 3 pills are called third longevity pills. This old man refined them according to an incomplete ancient recipe. It is said that they can increase one's lifespan, but there is a flaw. These pills are produced at the same time every time, and 2 of them are highly poisonous, while only one can increase one's lifespan. At this point, Ren Kai slightly straightened his body. This old man has obtained this method of refining pills for more than 30 years, and I've finally figured out the way. It's just that I still can't be 100% sure, so it's a little regretful. This fellow Taoist seems to be from a famous sect, so I wonder if you can dispel one or two of my doubts." Zhang Yan looked at it and said, "Can fellow Taoist allow me to take a closer look?" Ren Kai raised his hand and made a gesture of allowing him to appreciate it, but his expression and demeanor were very conceited. In Ren Kai's opinion, for Zhang Yan to be able to refine a pill like the Long Yu pill at such a young age, he should have a good master. It should be known that some large sects would inevitably have some secret methods of refining pills. As long as he followed the prescribed order, it wouldn't be strange for him to be able to refine 1 or 2 good pills. However, the path of an alchemist ultimately still relied on the 3 orifices technique. This was the real thing, and it couldn't be faked at all. And to identify the difference between these pills, he could only rely on the 3 orifices technique. He had also practiced bitterly for 30 years before he could detect the minute differences. In the past, when he sparred with fellow Taoists, anyone who came would only need to appraise these 3 pills and point out the difference, and the other would willingly admit defeat. If they were still unconvinced, he could also swallow them on the spot. Once this move was used, the other party would all flee in defeat. It could be said that he had always been successful in all these years. This time at the elixir gathering, he was confident that he could use this pill to suppress a large number of alchemists. Zhang Yan took a few glances. After cultivating to the 2nd tier of the clear qi realm, he had coincidentally emptied a qi orifice. He had also taken some time out to practice the internal orifices technique. However, the method was a method, and the heat control was different. These 2 points were not the same. Identifying the quality of some ordinary pills or refining pills might not be a problem, but identifying such a strange pill was a little difficult for him. However, although Zhang Yan couldn't use the 3 orifices technique to identify the pills, he still had a method that the other party would never think of. He reached into his sleeve and touched the remnant of the jade, and his mind sank into it. As his cultivation increased, the scene inside the jade changed again. Originally, the remnant of the jade could only reflect the scenery within 5 steps, but now it could reflect everything beyond 15 steps. Other than living things, everything was the same as the outside world. Anything further was a gray haze. He shifted his gaze from afar. At this moment, there was an identical brocade box in front of his doppelganger, and the 3 pills were neatly arranged inside. He smiled slightly. Although he couldn't rely on the 3 orifices technique or the internal orifices technique to identify these 3 pills, he could use his doppelganger to swallow them and experiment. Without hesitation, he reached out to pick up the pill in the middle and swallowed it. As soon as the pill entered his stomach, it began to boil like fire. In an instant, it corroded through his internal organs and came out through his abdomen. The toxicity was far more potent than he had imagined. With a thought, his doppelganger gradually recovered. He picked up the 2nd pill and popped it into his mouth. After swallowing this pill, he felt nothing at first, thinking that everything was normal. However, gradually he felt a chill spread throughout his limbs and bones. First, it was his hair, then his eyebrows, and all the hair on his body fell off. Then, his skin wrinkled and cracked as if molting. When he wiped it with his hand, it was a flurry of dandruff. Not only that, but the flesh on his body also seemed to be rotting. Piece by piece they fell off. He clenched his fists and his knuckles burst out of his flesh. He stood up, but before he could take 2 steps, the flesh on his body slid down like soft mud. Zhang Yan was no longer interested in watching. It should be known that although there was no danger in using his doppelganger to experiment, he could still feel it clearly. In other words, he could taste all the pain. If it wasn't for his previous experience and his nerves that had been honed to an incomparably tough level, he might not have been able to hold on just by looking at this scene. These 2 pills were undoubtedly poison pills. He couldn't help but look at the last pill. Ren Kai couldn't help but smile when she saw that Zhang Yan didn't move for a long time. After all, this junior's foundation wasn't stable. Just because he had a master, he dared to fiddle in front of this old man. He didn't know that the path of alchemy was as vast as the sea and endless. Young people, if you don't accumulate experience, you won't be able to walk 1,000 miles. You must know that only with a solid foundation can you have any achievements on this path. At this moment, Zhang Yan raised his head and smiled at Ren Kai. He stretched out his hand and took out the last pill. Ren Kai frowned slightly, but his expression didn't change. However, Zhang Yan's next words shocked him so much that he almost jumped up. This pill isn't poisonous, but it can increase one's lifespan. Only when all 3 pills are taken at the same time will the effect be seen. Chapter 59. Ren Kai stared blankly at Zhang Yan. He had met countless famous masters before, but none of them could be as certain as Zhang Yan, able to distinguish which was a real pill and which was a poison pill, let alone clearly see the medicinal properties. In fact, the toxicity of the 2 pills was divided into yin and yang, and when swallowed, it needed to be crushed, and the last pill neutralized the medicinal properties before it could be consumed. The incomplete part of the prescription described how to combine the 3 properties in the pill furnace. After Ren Kai had obtained this prescription, he had gone through his own modifications to come up with this nondescript thing. The medicinal effects were also less than a third of the original. To say that the medicinal pill that neutralized the medicinal effects could increase one's lifespan was just trying to put gold on his face. Now that Zhang Yan had seen through the mystery behind it, he couldn't help but blush, embarrassed and speechless. Zhang Yan saw his awkwardness, but smiled and said, "I won't tell anyone about what happened today, but I have a presumptuous request." Ren Kai secretly sighed in relief and hurriedly said, "Fellow Taoist, please speak." Zhang Yan pointed at the 3 longevity pills and said, "I'm willing to exchange one of the best pills with fellow Taoist Ren for this prescription. What do you think?" Ren Kai was stunned. This pill was called Longevity Gift, but it could only increase one's lifespan by 15 to 20 years. Although the medicinal herbs used were not expensive, they were not few either. For cultivators, its value was somewhat useless. He couldn't help but hesitate and carefully asked, "May I ask, what does fellow Taoist want?" Once a pill involved toxicity, it had to be guarded against, and one had to be extremely cautious. This not only concerned the reputation of the alchemist, but if Zhang Yan refined the pill and used it to harm others, and others found out that this pill was his unique secret method, wouldn't they come to his door to settle the score? Unexpectedly, Zhang Yan said straightforwardly, "There's no need to hide this from others. In recent years, my master has often felt that the pills recorded in the old pill catalog are too few, and many famous pills are not recorded. Thus, he is planning to compile a new pill catalog, and intends to collect rare pill recipes from all over the world. Thus, he was eager to do so." "I see." Ren Kai suddenly understood, but he still didn't relent, and asked again, "May I ask who your master is?" Zhang Yan stood up and cupped his hands in the direction of the Yingtsang sect. "My master is Zhou Yan." Ren Kai was startled, and hurriedly stood up as well, and said with a face of seriousness, "So you're Grandmaster Zhou's disciple." Zhang Yan hurriedly took a step back and said in surprise, "Fellow Taoist, why do you have to do this?" Ren Kai said seriously, "This greeting is not meant for fellow Taoist, but because I respect Grandmaster Zhou. Grandmaster was originally a direct descendant of the Zhou clan of Dingyang, but he resolutely gave up the smooth path of cultivation and set his heart on the path of alchemy. He only said that he would refine a medicine of longevity for the people of the world, and is truly a role model for our generation, worthy of being called a saint of alchemy. Now that he is compiling the pill catalog, I dare not refuse." Hearing this, Zhang Yan was startled. He didn't think that when Zhou Changju was murdered, he would have left the Zhou clan because he had no other choice. In the end, he didn't think that there would be such rumors circulating in the outside world. It was truly unexpected. However, it was very likely that this was a cover-up by the Zhou clan for the sake of their reputation. Not only did they cover up the truth, they also perfectly explained Zhou Changju's motive for breaking out of the sect. Ren Kai walked to the desk, took out a brush, ink, and paper, and wrote down a pill recipe. After thinking for a moment, he took out another piece of paper and wrote something on it. Then he handed the 2 pieces of paper and the brocade box containing the pills to Zhang Yan and said, "These 2 pill recipes, one is an incomplete ancient recipe, and the other was later added and modified by me. Now, along with the 3 pills, I am giving them to fellow Taoist. I hope you don't mind. Zhang Yan received it with a serious expression. He was about to take out a pill from his sleeve, but Ren Kai reached out and stopped him, saying, "Since Grandmaster Zhou intends to compile another pill catalog, I will do my best. This recipe and this pill are all mine to give to Grandmaster." He paused, then continued, "At the elixir gathering, there are many families and sects, and there are also many rare pill recipes in their hands. I will try to persuade my fellow Taoists to join in this grand event. What does fellow Taoists think?" After saying this, he looked eagerly at Zhang Yan. How could Zhang Yan not see through his intentions? He smiled and said, "Since this pill is a gift from fellow Taoist, in the future pill catalog, fellow Taoist's name will be recorded." Hearing this, Ren Kai was overjoyed. Alchemists had no hope on the path of cultivation, and their lifespans were not long. All they wanted was a false reputation. With Zhou Changju's status among alchemists, once his name was compiled into a pill catalog, his name would be immortalized for generations to come. In the past few decades, Zhou Changju had indeed been collecting pill recipes and compiling a new catalog. Before he left, he had even told Zhang Yan to collect a few more pill recipes if he had the chance. However, when Zhang Yan brought out the pill cultivation catalog, he had only wanted to use those pills as an excuse. He hadn't expected to reap such a pleasant surprise. With Ren Kai's help, his name would definitely spread throughout the water nation of the Dang region in a short period of time. It could be said that he had already achieved half of his original goal. Ren Kai suddenly thought of something and slapped his forehead, saying, "I've only cared about chatting with fellow Taoist here, and I've delayed fellow Taoist journey. Why don't you travel with us? Little brother is an emissary of a sect, and I have an important mission on my shoulders. I won't delay fellow Taoist any longer." Zhang Yan politely declined the other's good intentions. He was well aware of his own situation. He could rely on the remnant jade to deceive her, but when it came to knowledge of the Tao of alchemy, he was definitely not as good as Ren Kai. If he said too much, he would definitely be exposed, so it would be best for him to avoid contact with Ren Kai in the future. Ren Kai's expression was one of regret. After saying a few more words, Zhang Yan stood up and said his goodbyes. When the ship's owner, Huang Bao, saw Ren Kai politely send Zhang Yan off, he couldn't help but be filled with admiration. Only now did he realize that this young cultivator's identity was not simple. However, he was experienced in the ways of the world, so if Zhang Yan didn't mention his own background, he wouldn't mention it either. He steered the ship to the bottom of the cliff. 2 whale demons threw down 6 large hooks, which Huang Bao ordered his men to take over and fasten them to the edge of the ship. Then he shouted upwards, and the 2 whale demons exerted their strength together. Amidst a series of creaking sounds, the entire ship was pulled up bit by bit. When they reached the entrance above, another 2 whale demons stood up in the cave. Each of them stretched out a pair of hands and gently lifted the bottom of the ship over their heads. Then, they placed the ship firmly on the river behind them. Huang Bao quickly took out a small bag of spirit shells and handed it over. The whale demon pinched it between his thumb and index finger and weighed it in his hand. Seeing that the quantity was about right, he didn't count it carefully and just pushed the ship down along the rapid current that flowed through the cave. The river in the cave was full of twists and turns, and the current was rapid. If they were not careful when making a turn, the ship would crash into the cliff and shatter into pieces. But thanks to Huang Bao's superb boating skills, they were able to make it through the daunting experience without any mishap. About 4 hours later, Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao finally arrived at a relatively flat lake. It was already nighttime, and every 1,000 steps on the surface of the lake, there was a bright dot of light that was as bright as a cage lamp. As the boat approached, it was discovered that it was actually a smiling mermaid holding a tray in her hand with a resplendent pearl on it. It was dazzling like flowing colors, and the halo of light was exquisite. From time to time, these mermaids would cast flirtatious glances at Zhang Yan and giggle. Zhang Yan found it a little strange, but Huang Bao seemed to be used to it and turned a blind eye to it. After traveling for a while, he gradually docked the ship at a pier and said, "Fellow Taoist, you can disembark here. Follow the waterway all the way south, and you'll reach the South Kasha Palace at the southern end of the Water Kingdom. You only need to pay a small fortune, and there will be a courier waiting for you wherever you want to go. It's also very convenient to inquire about things." Zhang Yan cupped his fist and said, "Thank you, ship owner Huang." Huang Bao returned the gesture and said, "I'll be staying here for another 10 or 20 days. If fellow Taoist doesn't mind, you can come here and tell me what to do." "You're too polite, ship owner Huang. If there's anything I can help you with, I'll definitely trouble you." Huang Bao burst into laughter. Looking at the lake full of mermaids, he patted Zhang Yan's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Demon cultivators are mostly fickle and heartless. I've suffered a lot from them, so you must be careful, fellow Taoist." Luo Xiao snorted discontentedly. Zhang Yan smiled and didn't say anything. He cupped his fist and bid farewell to Huang Bao. When he and Luo Xiao got off the ship, they saw a glistening waterway under their feet. Under the clear lake bed were white shells that glinted with a soft light, stretching all the way to the south and pointing out the way forward. Zhang Yan looked ahead and saw a sea of stars at the end of the distance. That must be where South Kasha Palace was located. However, the spiritual energy here was disturbed by the magnetic field, so they couldn't fly. It seemed that they could only walk on the waves to cross this vast lake. Luo Xiao chuckled behind him and said, "You don't have to do this, Langjun. Just move forward without worry." Zhang Yan was surprised. "Fellow Taoist Luo has been here before?" Luo Xiao smiled and said nothing. Zhang Yan shook his head. Since Luo Xiao said so, there must be a reason behind it. He took a step forward. As soon as he stepped on the water surface, he heard a whistle coming out of nowhere. A carp leaped up and caught his foot. When he took a second step, another carp jumped up and let him step on its back. Along the way, with every step he took, these carps would jump up just in time to support his falling footsteps. After walking for about a kilometer or two, he saw hundreds of enormous water palaces connected together. Strings of pearls hung from the eaves of the palaces, and on the surface of the water floated rows of colorful water lanterns. In front of the main palace was actually a bustling market with people coming and going. At a glance, there were probably no less than 10,000 people. If it wasn't for some strange-looking demon cultivators mixed among them, he would almost think that this was a country in the mortal world with abundant goods and abundant people. Arriving at the water palace, Zhang Yan quickly found the location of South Kasha Palace. He went in and revealed his identity to the courier officer, showing him his envoy letter. Seeing that it was an alchemist from Feng Tsang, the courier officer didn't dare to be negligent. After flipping through the envoy letter, he respectfully returned it to Zhang Yan and said, "The superior has already said that the envoy from Feng Tsang has arrived. You can stay at Green Wave Pavilion first. If you don't like it, I will report to the superior tomorrow and then make arrangements." At this time, a valiant young cultivator happened to walk in. When he heard the second half of the sentence, he couldn't help but become angry. He took a step forward and asked loudly, "Wait, we clearly arrived first. Why don't we have a place to stay, but there's a place for them to stay?" Chapter 60. These two are pill masters of the Yuzong sect. Naturally, they can stay in the upper garden. The courier's expression didn't change as he spoke slowly. He had been a guard here for a long time and had seen all kinds of people. Naturally, he wouldn't be frightened by a few words from the other. Yuzong sect. The young cultivator's expression changed slightly. Then, he saw that there were only two people in Zhang Yan's group. When he heard the word, pill master, his expression relaxed. His tone became tough again and he sneered, "So what if it's the Yuzong sect? Don't tell me they don't care about first come, first served?" He stood in front of Zhang Yan and raised the magic sword in his hand. He said, "We don't have a place to stay yet. How about we have a sword duel? If you lose, you'll give this garden to me. How about it?" The courier looked on coldly from the side and didn't say anything to stop them. This person's cultivation was probably in the opening meridian realm and hadn't entered the first tier of the clear chi realm. The magic sword in his hand still had some spiritual light. However, Zhang Yan didn't even look at him. He only ordered the courier to take the token and quickly lead the way. The courier didn't dare to disobey. He took the token and led the way. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and also walked out. You! The young cultivator was angered by the way Zhang Yan looked at him as if he didn't exist. His face flushed red and his whole body trembled. Seeing that Zhang Yan was about to step out of the gate of the courier house, he shouted, "Rise!" The magic sword in his hand flew out of its sheath with a clang and slashed at Zhang Yan's back. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he turned his head. He rubbed his lips and blew out a turbid qi. This turbid qi was once again mixed with a heavy baleful aura, and it went to meet the flying sword. However, a qi-la sound was heard, and the flying sword's spiritual energy was almost depleted. The sword fell down, but the turbid qi's momentum didn't decrease, and it continued to rush forward. The qi hadn't arrived yet, but the young man's complexion couldn't help but change. Right at this moment, someone shouted, "Fellow Taoist, please show mercy." A flying talisman flew out of nowhere and released a ray of light in the air in an attempt to block this turbid qi. Who would have thought that the turbid qi would easily pierce through it with a piu sound? That person exclaimed in surprise. A silver ring in the shape of a full moon flew out from his hand and directly collided with the turbid qi. This silver ring was brimming with spiritual energy and was dazzling. With a single glance, one could tell that it was a magic treasure. Zhang Yan frowned. He took a deep breath and withdrew the foul air back into his chest. In the blink of an eye, he saw a gorgeous woman standing with a sword in her hand. With a wave of her hand, the silver ring returned to her wrist. This woman looked flirtatious, but her expression was cold. With one look, one could tell that she was from the profound sect. She was probably at the first level of the bright qi realm, a genuine human cultivator. However, when she saw Zhang Yan, her expression changed and she said, "Zhang Yan, it's actually you." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "Fellow Taoist, have we met before?" The woman sneered twice and said, "Of course you don't remember me. Below the sweeping cloud peak, do you remember senior brother Shin Jingyue?" Zhang Yan's gaze focused, and he looked at her again. He nodded and said, "So it's a fellow Taoist from the Southern Flower Sect. I wonder how senior brother Shin is doing?" The young cultivator was so scared that his face had turned pale. At this moment, he forced himself to speak. "Senior sister Jiang, you know each other?" The woman said coldly, "Thanks to fellow Taoist, senior brother Shin passed away half a year ago." Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. That day, when Shin Jingyue forcefully deduced the eroding runes, it was obvious that he had exhausted all of his efforts. This ending was not unexpected, but he didn't have any ill feelings towards this person. The woman took a few steps forward and blocked in front of the young cultivator. She said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, today my junior brother did something wrong and offended you. I will bring him back to punish him. Senior brother Zhang, can you give me some face?" Zhang Yan faintly smiled and said, "This is the territory of the Water Nation. I naturally won't make things difficult for you." The woman let out a sigh of relief, but who knew that Zhang Yan would turn around and say to the courier officer, "I heard that after country King Ji established the Water Nation, you established rules, etiquette, and laws. As a result, the cultivators of the world didn't view you as a wild race. After seeing you today, I can't help but feel disappointed. When I see you in the future, I will ask you where the laws are and where the rules are." After saying that, he didn't look at the two of them and turned around to leave with Luo Xiao. The courier officer and the woman's expressions changed at the same time. The courier officer walked in front of the woman with a cold expression and said, "Fellow Taoist Jiang, please give me an explanation for this matter." Zhang Yan's simple words forced the courier officer to step out and deal with this matter. What was originally a very small matter had now become out of hand. The woman instantly became extremely angry, but there was nothing she could do. The young cultivator also seemed to realize that he had caused some trouble. He said, "Senior sister, I will take responsibility for my own actions." The woman stopped him and took a deep breath. She comforted him, "Junior brother, don't worry. Senior brother Shin and the Lien family of the Water Nation are old friends. Perhaps this matter isn't as bad as you think. Wait until you see senior brother." She stared at the back of Zhang Yan's departing figure and frowned. She bit her lower lip and thought, I heard that Zhang Yan wasn't even a lower house disciple before, but from his foul breath, he is clearly at the second tier of the clear Qi realm. He is probably not far from the third tier. I thought that with the help of Master Yu Huan, entering the first tier of the clear Qi realm within half a year was already extremely fast. I didn't think that this Zhang Yan would be even faster than me. Could it be that he really is a genius? I don't know how long I'll have to wait to avenge senior brother Shin. Just as Zhang Yan stepped out of the gate of the courier station, he saw a cultivator walk in from outside. The two of them made eye contact and nodded at each other. That person only paused for a moment on Zhang Yan but glanced at Luo Xiao a few more times before passing by. What is this person's cultivation? Zhang Yan asked in a deep voice. He could faintly see that this person's appearance was somewhat similar to Shin Jingyue's. Furthermore, this person's attire was exactly the same as the two Nanhua sect disciples from before. He was definitely a disciple of Nanhua sect, but he was unable to see through this person's cultivation. This person's cultivation is similar to mine, we're both at the second tier. After Luo Xiao used the Shell King True Dew to recover, her cultivation that she hadn't broken through for a long time had increased once again. She was now a cultivator at the second tier of the profound light realm, bright night like day. She looked back at that person and asked, Leng Jun, is there something wrong with this person? Zhang Yan shook his head lightly and thought to himself, listening to the words of that woman just now, Shin Jingyue is already dead. This person seems to be somewhat related to Shin Jingyue. If we meet again in the future, there might be another dispute. I need to quickly raise my cultivation. As for that young cultivator, he didn't care about him at all. He just needed to borrow the water country to deal with him. As for how to deal with him, he was too lazy to ask. The Bai Yun Pavilion was located at the east of the Southern Palace. It was an independent island in the center of the lake. There was a pavilion that was half submerged in the lake. At night, the shadows of the trees danced and the moon shone brightly in the sky. The beach was covered in frost and the water reflected in the distance. After the courier brought Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao here, he gave them a restriction talisman and left. Zhang Yan took 2 steps on the island and felt the sound coming from under his feet. He thought, this place is cold and full of water. It's suitable for me to condense the serene in heavy water. According to the Lan Yun secret book, after reaching the second level of clear qi, one could condense the serene in heavy water with 16 mouthfuls of clear qi. 1 drop of the serene in heavy water had the power of 1,000 caddies and was difficult to block. If it was 10 drops, there would be few opponents among the same generation. If it was 100 drops, 1,000 soldiers would retreat. If it was 1,000 drops, it could reverse the flow of waterfalls and change the course of rivers. However, there was a shortcoming in practicing this method. It required 16 mouthfuls of clear qi to stay in one's chest at all times. Every day, one had to absorb the serene in qi from the depths of the cold water. After 108 days, one could condense 1 drop. Moreover, one could not use it against an enemy when refining it. Otherwise, all previous efforts would be wasted. Moreover, after the 16 mouthfuls of clear qi were condensed into the serene in heavy water, the lost clear qi would need to be cultivated again. In this way, the time needed to break through to the 3rd level of clear qi would be delayed. In fact, the Lan Yun secret book walked the Tao of Dharma. It paid particular attention to the transformation and condensation of spiritual qi. Naturally, it did not pay special attention to the speed of cultivation. However, if it walked the Tao of qi, such as the Taibai Golden Book, it would always focus on honing Shen qi. Other than that, there was nothing else. However, in Zhang Yan's mind, even though he had a lot of magic treasures, he would never complain about having more methods to fight against an enemy. There was still 9 months until the elixir gathering. If he could break through to the 3rd level of clear qi in half a year, he would have 81 mouthfuls of spiritual qi in his body. When he practiced the serene in heavy water, he would have less to worry about. After making up his mind, Zhang Yan looked at Luo Xiao and said, in these 3 months, I will be cultivating in seclusion. Unless King Ji summons me, I will not see any visitors. Luo Xiao nodded and said, Leng Jun, don't worry. I will be waiting outside. Don't worry and cultivate. Zhang Yan walked into the water pavilion and waved his talisman. The restriction of the Baiyun pavilion was opened and the formation was activated. Without the owner's permission, even a core formation cultivator would not be able to enter. Sitting cross-legged in the quiet room, Zhang Yan was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he took out the 3 longevity pills from his sleeve. After looking at them for a moment, he threw one of them into his mouth. As soon as it entered his abdomen, it was enveloped by spiritual qi, preventing the poison from acting up. Then he silently circulated his xian qi to refine it. Afterwards, he stored the accumulated dan qi into the open qi opening in his chest. After he finished refining the first pill, he swallowed the second pill into his stomach and repeated the same trick. After he had refined the 2 yin-yang pill poisons, he took out a flying sword that was filled with spiritual qi from his Qiankuan sleeve. He looked at it carefully, opened his mouth, and spat out a mouthful of murky qi on it. With a sizzling sound, as if a bucket of dye had been poured into clear water, the spiritual qi on the flying sword was quickly stained. In an instant, it became an ordinary sword. Even the body of the sword was corroded and mottled marks could be seen. Zhang Yan nodded in satisfaction. His idea was indeed feasible. Using the condensed murky qi to wrap around the heavy fiend qi could indeed stain the flying sword, but the effect seemed to be somewhat insufficient. For example, when he was fighting against Wu Zhen, even if the opponent's flying sword was slightly stained by the heavy fiend qi, he could still control the flying sword to injure him. However, if the yin-yang poison was mixed in, then the effect would obviously increase by a few levels. And now, as long as the opponent had not condensed the profound light seed and the flying sword came over, he would spit out a mouthful of air. That would destroy the spirit and contaminate the qi. Even if he were to face such a method, he would not be able to block it even without his talisman. Chapter 61. After the closed-door training, Zhang Yan would condense the clear and turbid air in the middle of the night, when the sun was rising, and combine them into one. With the help of the moon-seizing jade amulet, his progress was extremely fast. In addition, he took out 2 hours every day to refine the fate-determining jade amulet. Every time this jade was refined, it could withstand 3 attacks from a transcendent artifact. In Zhang Yan's opinion, it was more valuable than a normal transcendent artifact. As for the rest of the time, he used it to practice the internal orifice technique. Once he mastered this technique, he would be able to identify many medicinal properties even without the broken jade. Not only that, even if the spiritual roots of the immortal herbs were deep underground, he would be able to identify them as long as he passed by. It was the most useful technique. He thought to himself that if one day he was no longer in the Yingtsong sect, he would be able to use this technique to refine elixirs and medicines without the help of others. After cultivating like this for about 100 days, he had merged the 75 breaths of clear and turbid qi into one. In addition to the ones he had refined earlier, he now had 78 breaths of spiritual qi in his body. He only needed to refine 3 more to break through. He reached the 3rd level of the clear qi stage in 1 breath. Just as he was about to continue, he heard the sound of a golden bell outside. He retreated from his meditation. He opened the door of the quiet room and walked outside. Luo Xiao, who was waiting in the corridor, came up and said, "King Ji's youngest son, Prince Zhen, Ji Zhang, has sent an envoy. He is waiting outside the Baiyun pavilion." Zhang Yan didn't expect that Ji Zhang would actually come looking for him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. Everyone knew that Ji Jiushang, the king of the Water Nation, had the intention to abolish the East Palace and make Prince Zhen the crown prince. If nothing went wrong, he would definitely be the next king. Moreover, he was the protagonist of this elixir gathering. He could not afford to offend him and left him outside. Luo Xiao obviously knew the importance of the matter, so she specially reported to him. He gave her a look of approval and took out a talisman to dispel the restriction on the island. On the surface of the lake, more than 50 people were standing on a huge lotus leaf. The person in front was wearing the court uniform of the Water Nation of the Dang region. Her face was like a peach blossom and her figure was graceful. It was a female official. Zhang Yan's expression changed. The sect leader of the Yudzong faction liked to use female cultivators, and this Jijiushang also liked to use female officials. This caused the entire Shui nation to follow suit, and it seemed like this King Zhen was no exception. Seeing that the prohibition had been opened, the female official and her group stepped onto the island. Behind her were 4 female servants who were carrying a tray. As they approached the island, she first glanced at Zhang Yan, then smiled sweetly and said, "His Royal Highness King Zhen has decreed that Zhang Yan, the emissary of the Ming Tsang faction, is highly skilled in alchemy, so he has specially bestowed a dazzling luo robe." Her enunciation was clear, and her voice was loud but not muffled. It was a little hoarse, but it was very comfortable. She ordered someone to bring a dark purple Taoist robe to Zhang Yan, then said, "This robe can ward off water and fire, block metal, gather qi and calm the mind. Please accept it, fellow Taoist Zhang." Zhang Yan waved his hand, indicating for Luo Shao to accept it. Almost every alchemist who came here was rewarded by the Water Royal family, so he was not surprised. Following that, he had Luo Shao offer over 100 spirit shells as a presentation according to the rules. Who knew that the female official would reject it with a smile? At first, Zhang Yan thought that she thought it was too little, but then he heard a female servant say, "My master doesn't care for these spirit shells of yours." The female official's phoenix eyes turned, and she scolded her, saying, Don't be rude. Fellow Taoist Zhang is the direct descendant of Master Zhou, how can you be rude?" The female official said in a low voice, "Yes." Zhang Yan could tell that this female official seemed to have other matters to attend to, so he cupped his hands and said, "May I know how to address you, senior official?" The female official also cupped her hands in return, saying, "Fellow Taoist Zhang need not be so courteous. I am Zhen Ming, and I don't deserve to be called senior official. You can just call me fellow Taoist." Since the other party didn't mention her position in the Water Royal family, Zhang Yan was happy to do so. He turned to the side and said, "Fellow Taoist Jin, please come into the pavilion for a chat." Han Ming, however, extended her lily-white hand and waved it lightly. She said, "There's no need. I've come today for official business, and also for a private request." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't know when, please tell me, fellow Taoist." Zhen Ming sighed and said, "This lowly official has a younger brother. A month ago he was too aggressive in his cultivation of the mysterious technique, which resulted in the evil fire's backlash, causing his internal organs to be injured. He needs to be treated with the Imperial Lu pill. Although this pill is easy to refine, only the one with the most medicinal strength is useful just now. For the rest, there is no benefit in taking too many. I heard that Grandmaster Ren once highly praised fellow Taoist Zhang, praising him for his friendly ability to discern medicinal properties and understand pharmacology. As such, I have come to ask for fellow Taoist's assistance." Zhang Yan nodded. He understood the purpose of the other party's visit. It turned out that it was because Run Kai wanted to spread his name. The Imperial Lu pill was extremely famous in the field of alchemy. It could calm one's inner fire, remove poisonous gas, and temper one's meridians. Those who practiced the path of strength would sometimes be too aggressive and would be attacked by the internal and external fire. This would cause their minds to become dull, their tempers to be irritable, and they would kill at the slightest provocation. It was extremely difficult to control. If it was not properly treated, it was very possible that they would lose their mind. However, he felt that it was a little strange. There were so many alchemists in Shui country. Could it be that none of them could discern medicinal properties? Why did they have to ask him for help? There must be some other reason behind this. Zhang Yan thought to himself, "I heard that this Shen King loves alchemy and is practically obsessed with it. Could it be that she heard of my reputation and is using this as a pretext to test me?" Thinking of this, his spirits rose and he asked, "Where are the pills?" Zhen Ming said, "I've brought them with me." Why haven't you presented them yet?" Made a sound of acknowledgement and brought out the coiled crane copper cauldron in her hands. Luo Shao stepped forward to receive it, but suddenly pouted and said, "Once this cauldron is opened, it needs to be consumed within 2 hours. Don't brag about it because you don't have the ability. Otherwise, you'll waste this cauldron of pills and cause Second Lang to suffer for nothing. Zhang Yan's expression did not change, but he put down the hand he was about to extend. He stood there silently, not saying a word or moving. Zhen Ming's eyebrows rose, and her phoenix eyes shone with power. She said coldly, "Slap yourself 10 times." Ra was stunned, and an expression of grievance appeared on her face. However, she did not dare to resist. She raised her white palm and repeatedly slapped her own face. When she stopped, a sliver of blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. Zhen Ming turned to look at Zhang Yan and said, "My daughter has never been disciplined. I've made a fool of myself in front of you." Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and only then did he extend his hand to receive the medicine cauldron. He reached out to open the cauldron. As soon as the lid was opened, a wisp of white gas rose up, and a wave of fragrance rushed into his nostrils. He squinted his eyes and after a moment, pointed at one of the pills and said, "This is it." Zhen Ming looked at Zhang Yan with surprise, and instructed a female attendant beside her, "Take it and give it to Second Lang. Come back quickly." The female attendant did not dare to be negligent. She used a silk handkerchief that she had prepared to take the pills, and hurriedly returned to the lotus leaf in the lake. She could faintly see that there was still a youth who was trapped in the middle. His ankles and wrists were shackled, and when he saw that someone was feeding him pills, he began to struggle. Presumably, this person was Zhen Ming's younger brother. Zhang Yan did not think that she would actually bring him here. He did not want to look any longer, and since he had nothing to do, he stood where he was and began to chat with Zhen Ming. As they chatted, Zhen Ming was very surprised. This Zhang Yan had originally thought that he was only an alchemist, but he did not expect that this person was not only familiar with ancient records, but also knew all kinds of miscellaneous anecdotes. She did not feel bored talking to this person at all, and her interest in the topic was unconsciously aroused. After a few more words, the female attendant turned back and reported, "After Second Lang took it, his mind was relaxed, and he has already fallen asleep." Zhen Ming's face revealed a joyful expression. Fellow Zhang is indeed an outstanding talent of the present age. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "I wouldn't dare. I was just lucky." Zhen Ming muttered to herself for a moment, and looked at Zhang Yan. She said, "With fellow Zhang's intelligence, you must have understood the monarch's intentions by coming to the alchemy gathering." Zhang Yan glanced at the other party, and nodded lightly. Zhen Ming seemed to heave a sigh of relief, and said, "However, Prince Zhen will naturally not let fellow Zhang suffer a loss. This time, he has agreed that the lustrous cloud shellfish field will henceforth belong to the Yudsong sect, and the 3 pools will not provoke him over this matter. In addition, fellow Zhang and Prince Zhen can be considered to be fellow cultivators, so I wonder what fellow Zhang wants? His Royal Highness will do his best to satisfy you." This time, Ji Zhoshang was using the alchemy gathering to create momentum for Prince Zhen, Ji Zhang, so that everyone in the world would know that he was the next monarch. As for the Essence Metal Life Fruit Book, it was a technique to cultivate strength. Anyone with a discerning eye could naturally see that the winner of this book could only be Ji Zhang. However, since it was the alchemy gathering, he could not go overboard. Others had come to support him, so he had to give them some benefits, right? Furthermore, he could also use his wealth to win over the hearts of fellow cultivators in the world. After this alchemy gathering, Prince Zhen's position as crown prince would definitely be stable. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "If it's possible, I would like to borrow the Essence Metal Life Fruit Book to take a look." Zhen Ming did not think that Zhang Yan would make such a request. She was stunned at first, then said in shock, "Fellow Taoist, you are a human cultivator. Forgive me for being blunt, but reading this book is useless." Zhang Yan, however, shook his head and said, "I'm not reading this book for cultivation. I'm just trying to resolve a doubt in my heart. However, I won't take it for free. My esteemed teacher has a bottle of medicinal pills called the Pill of Transformation. As long as one's cultivation reaches a certain level, as long as they consume this pill, they will definitely be able to transform and shed their shells." Zhen Ming's eyes brightened. In the Water Nation, Even the direct descendants of the royal family might not be able to transform. It should be known that only after transforming could they cultivate profound techniques. This was similar to the opening of meridians for human cultivators. If this bottle of pill of transformation was really as Zhang Yan had said, then its value to the royal family was practically immeasurable. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I can't make the decision on this matter. I have to report this to Prince Zhen." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's how it should be." Zhen Ming seemed to be rather impatient. After saying a few more words, she hurriedly bid farewell and left. Zhang Yan, however, seemed to have thought of something. He first whispered a few words into Luo Zhao's ear, then stood there in a daze for a while before returning to the water pavilion to meditate. He originally thought that exchanging medicinal pills for books would drag on for at least 10 days or half a month, and at least 2 or 3 times. He did not think that Zhen Ming would come to visit again that very night. After leading her into the inner chamber, Zhen Ming took out a book made of gold and said seriously, "Prince Zhen found out about this medicinal pill and was unable to contain his joy. He urged me to quickly show this book to you. I hope that you can swear an oath that after reading this book, you will not reveal even half a sentence of this book to a second person." Zhang Yan looked at the book in his hand. He did not think that this book was already in Prince Zhen's hands, yet he would so easily show it to him? Even he, at this moment, felt the sense of disbelief in his heart. No wonder people said that Prince Zhen loved to do ridiculous things and treated medicinal pills as if they were his life. It seemed like he really did it on a whim and did not care about anything else. Judging from Zhen Ming's behavior, it seemed that this book was also secretly brought out. However, wasn't this a good thing for him? He immediately swore an oath. Zhen Ming's expression relaxed and she handed the book to Zhang Yan. She said, "Friend, please finish reading this quickly. I need to bring this book back as soon as possible." Zhang Yan nodded and began to flip through the book. With his current memory, he could naturally memorize the content after reading it once. Not long after, he put down the book and took out a bottle of medicinal pills from his sleeve. He handed it to Zhen Ming. Prince Zhen is an expert in this field. You can tell if it's real or fake with one look. Zhen Ming accepted the bottle and left happily. After the woman left the island, Zhang Yan stood by the railing of the water pavilion and looked at the vast expanse of mist in front of him. "Friend Luo, has there been anything strange in the city recently?" Luo Xiao replied, "If fellow Taoists didn't mention it, I really wouldn't have paid attention to it. During the day, I investigated and found that other than the disciples of the various sects, there were quite a number of demons with high cultivation bases gathered in one place." Zhang Yan shook his head and sighed. Prince Zhen is frivolous and does things according to his own will. He is not the type of person a ruler should be. I'm afraid that the matter of the elixir gathering has changed. He heard that the original crown prince of the water country had been in power for 100 years. Now that he had been abdicated, if he did not fight now, he would not have another chance in the future. Whether it was Ji Jiushang's intention to use this opportunity to sweep away the Eastern Palace's forces or the Eastern Palace's unwillingness to fail and counterattack, this was not a place to stay for long. However, he had already achieved his goal. The water country might be in a civil war, and it was inconvenient to enter and exit the water country. If he did not leave now, he might not be able to leave again. Zhang Yan said in a low voice, "A storm is brewing. Friend Luo, we should leave quickly." Chapter 62. Even though the Shui nation is in chaos, Lang Jun is the envoy of the Yutsong sect. Furthermore, there are disciples from the various sects who have come to congratulate you. Could it be that someone from the Shui nation would purposely come to make things difficult for Lang Jun? Luo Xiao felt a little strange. Even if the Shui nation was in chaos, it would not implicate Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "King Zhen is not secretive and can easily cause trouble. If he is safe and sound in the Elixir Association, it will be fine. But if he is forced to abdicate or even imprisoned, a small matter can become a big crime. For example, borrowing the golden book today. If it is exposed, it will be a big crime. If I don't leave now, will I just sit and wait to be involved?" The Shui nation of the Dang region was unique. No matter how high one's cultivation level was, one could not fly. If chaos broke out, no matter who was in power, the 8 entrances and exits would be sealed to prevent important people from escaping. In this way, life and death would be in the hands of others. This was not what Zhang Yan wanted. Luo Zhao's expression turned serious and said, "Leng Jun is right. I will prepare a boat." Zhang Yan stopped her and said, "Wait. Before you leave, go buy a batch of beautiful fish demons. I will bring them back to the island to decorate the scenery." He had been thinking about how to bring Luo Zhao into the sect. Now that he thought about it, wasn't coming to the Shui nation the best opportunity? If he bought a batch of female demons and brought them back to the sect, not only could he make friends with his fellow disciples, but he could also use them to hide Luo Zhao's identity and keep her by his side. Luo Zhao's beautiful eyes turned and she understood his intention, so she nodded and excused herself before walking out. Zhang Yan looked at the sparkling lake under the night sky and thought to himself, "It's a pity that I only need 3 breaths of spiritual qi to break through the 3rd realm of Qi Ming. Now it seems that I have to go, but I can't waste the cold qi in this vein." He took a deep breath and absorbed the cold energy coming from the depths of the water into his qi orifice. He had 3 qi orifices. The first one was used to refine the 3 orifices technique, the second to store the evil qi and yin-yang poison, and the third to absorb the cold energy. The cold qi in this qi orifice should be enough to refine a drop of nether yin heavy water. Once he returned to Yudzong's sect, he would find another cold yin cave. An hour later, Jiang Yu pushed open the door and entered the water beauty garden on the west side of the South Kasha Palace. She saw her senior brother, Shen Yefeng, cleaning a flying sword. Although his eyes were as calm as usual, the sharp murderous intent in his eyes could not be concealed no matter what. His wrist was even trembling slightly. Jiang Yu stepped forward and asked with concern, "Senior brother, what's wrong?" Shen Yefeng replied without raising his head, "The people I sent to keep an eye on Zhang Yan have reported back. They say that this person opened the Biyun Pavilion's prohibition spell after midnight today and is currently searching for boats. It seems that he intends to leave." Jiang Yu was shocked. "Senior brother, you want to?" Shen Yefeng calmly grabbed the cloth in his hand and immediately turned it to dust. "This is a good opportunity. Zhang Yan is a disciple of the Yudzong sect. I don't know how long I will have to wait to avenge second brother. Now that the heavens have opened their eyes and granted me a good opportunity, how can I miss it?" A hint of worry floated onto Jiang Yu's face and she said, "But senior brother, in a few years it will be the sword competition between the 16 sections. Although I also want to avenge senior brother Shen, why rush it?" Shen Yefeng shook his head firmly and said, "You also saw that Zhang Yan's cultivation speed is godly. He is now at the threshold of the 3rd level of clear qi. The Yudzong sect is a large sect. If I wait a few more years, who knows what level his cultivation has reached. If I don't kill him now, it will be even harder to kill him in the future." Jiang Yu saw that she could not dissuade Shen Yefeng and reminded him in a small voice, "Senior brother, the female Xiao with Zhang Yan is also very powerful. Are you confident?" Shen Yefeng snorted coldly and said, "I have talismans in my hands and spiritual energy is endless. What is there to be afraid of?" He stood up and waved his sleeves. With a series of chong-chong sounds, the 6 flying swords on the table all jumped up and were put into his sleeves. When the rooster crowed, Zhang Yan was ready to embark on his return journey. This time, Luo Zhao had purchased more than 100 fish demon beauties in one go. The 5 boats that he had hired were lined up on the wide surface of the water, cutting through the waves in the morning wind and mist, all the way to the exit. When they entered the water country, they went downstream from the high terrain on the south side. When they left the water country, they had to go upstream and go north along a river from another exit. After sailing for about 2 hours, the mountain wall that was originally tens of thousands of feet high slowly became shorter, and the surface of the lake gradually rose. The sky became open and spacious, and a pale white moon was still hanging in the sky that had not yet disappeared. After traveling for another dozen or so miles and passing through a few river channels, it was already the time of the morning. The sun was rising and the morning clouds were dancing. The surface of the river was golden and the clouds were swept away. A giant mountain wall appeared in front of them. In the belly of the mountain was a cave that was more than 600 meters tall. Rapid water flowed through it and made splashing sounds. Occasionally, 1 or 2 red-crowned cranes would fly by. Luo Xiao said, "After crossing this river, we will be officially out of the water country's territory. Without the magnetic force of the earth vein, we can fly." At this time, she suddenly turned around and said, "Leng, look! That boat is following us." Zhang Yan looked back and saw a boat approaching from the distance. Soon, it was 600 or 700 meters away. A cultivator wearing azure clothes stood at the bow of the boat. He immediately recognized him as the mystic light realm cultivator that he had passed by at the South Kasha Palace. Noticing Zhang Yan's gaze, the man's face darkened. He pressed his fingers together and pointed. A bright light flashed, and a sword light tore through the air. Luo Xiao hurriedly stepped forward to block it. The black profound light on his body shone and stopped the flying sword like a screen. Seeing that it couldn't land, the flying sword flew back with a whoosh. Zhang Yan asked from afar, "Sir, who are you?" The azure-robed cultivator shouted, "Zhang Yan, do you still remember Shen Jingyue?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Of course Senior Martial Brother Shen remembers." The azure-robed cultivator said harshly, "I am Shen Jingyue's big brother, Shen Yefeng. That day at the sweeping cloud peak, you caused my brother to vomit blood and die. Today I have come to take your life." However, Zhang Yan started to laugh loudly. Shen Yefeng was stunned and said angrily, "What are you laughing at?" Zhang Yan smiled coldly and said, "Those who kill will always be killed. I am laughing at how you want to kill me today, but you don't know that I can kill you today." Shen Yefeng flew into a rage and said, "Junior, I will let you know my power today." He waved his sleeve outwards, and several streaks of sword light instantly flew over like waterfalls. The profound light on Luo Xiao's body swept up and wrapped around a flying sword. At this moment, another sword light came slashing over. Her profound light spread and stopped it as well. However, she didn't know that there were 4 more sword lights coming at her. She took half a step back, and a magic sword appeared in her hand. She pushed 3 flying swords away with great difficulty, but when the 6th sword light came, she could no longer block it and had to retreat. She didn't have a weapon in her hand, so the 6 sword lights kept coming. She was forced to retreat step by step and was surrounded by danger. When Zhang Yan saw this, he immediately threw out an item and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, catch it." Luo Xiao hurriedly caught it. Once it was in her hand, she calmed her mind and saw a sword light coming down. She waved her hand to block it, and with a clang, a flying sword was hit. The spiritual light on the sword disappeared and it fell to the ground. Taking advantage of this gap, she made a hand seal and said, "Go." The magic treasure in her hand flew into the air, and there was a sound of metal exploding. It knocked down a flying sword head-on, and with a horizontal collision, it broke another flying sword. When Shen Yefeng saw that 3 flying swords were broken, he couldn't help but be shocked. He saw that the item in Luo Xiao's hand was shining with a red light, and it was shaped like a hammer. He could tell that it was a magic treasure that could break flying swords, so he hurriedly called back the remaining flying swords. How could Luo Xiao let it go? The hammer in her hand chased after it, and with a clang, it knocked down another flying sword. It fell into the surging river and disappeared in an instant. When Shen Yefeng called back the flying swords, he saw that there were only 2 flying swords left in his hand. He snorted and said, "Since you're not perfect, what's the use of keeping you?" He used force, and with 2 ka-ka sounds, the 2 flying swords were broken, and he threw them on the deck. His gaze was like a sword's blade as he stared at the opposite ship. He made a hand seal, and a golden light came out from the middle of his forehead. He pointed his finger forward and said, "Kill." Luo Xiao's expression changed slightly, and she quickly shouted, "Leng Jun, quickly dodge. This is a sword pellet." After a cultivator cultivated the mysterious light, he would then use a fine gold object to refine a sword pellet. After refining it, it would become one with the mind, and the mysterious light could then be attached to it, and it could be used to fly and kill people. After this sword pellet was repeatedly refined, its quality would become better and better. When it was used, it would be like using one's own arm, flexible and unpredictable. Even if a normal treasure could block it once, it would not be able to block the subsequent attacks. In a head-on battle, the person who used the sword pellet was usually the hardest to deal with. This was because once the magic treasure was used, the swordsman would see that the situation was not good, and he could use the sword ray to escape. When the opponent withdrew the magic treasure, he could turn around again. If this person's swordsmanship was a little more profound, after a few rounds, he would be able to find a flaw and kill a peer of the same cultivation base with his sword. Seeing the sword pellet flying over, Luo Xiao hurriedly drove the hammer to meet it. Unfortunately, she had not refined this magic treasure with her heart blood, so it was inevitable that she was a little slow when she used it. The sword pellet circled around and went straight towards Zhang Yan. Luo Xiao saw that she could not stop it in time, and she could not help but turn pale. At this moment, the sky above her head darkened, and the wide river in front of her was also blocked by a mountain wall. It turned out that the ship had turned into a bend, and the sword pellet that was flying in the air paused for a moment before flying back. Luo Xiao let out a sigh of relief and said, "Luckily this flying sword has not awakened its sword spirit, or else once its spirituality is formed, the sword and the soul will be one, and the sword will be able to reflect the sword pellet's location in the heart, and it will not lose its target." At this point she could not help but sigh and said, "Back then, I walked the Qi path. If I practiced the strength path, and changed my Shen technique, my whole body would be as hard as metal, and with a divine weapon in hand, why would I be afraid of his white essence sword pellet?" However, Zhang Yan was calm and composed as if victory was in his grasp and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. Right now, even though his aura is at its peak, he is not far from death. Those who use flying swords are able to attack and escape, and if they want to fight, they can fight, and if they want to escape, they can escape. But now that the magnetization force of the earth veins is preventing him from escaping, and now that he is bent on killing me, he has already lost his biggest advantage. In this case, if the two of us still cannot kill him, wouldn't it be a joke?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.